The main character of this story is named Seraphim Clive. He is a senior student at Livonian School. Tomorrow the students will write the first trial exam, and today the classrooms were being prepared for the trial exam. So the students were released early, right after the school assembly. A girl named Liana Solis appeared on the horizon. She was the best student of the year, and also the most popular girl in school. Noticing the guy, she wishes him good luck on the exam. The main character was born into an average family, and his grades weren't the highest. But he was lucky to date such a girl. True, this raised many questions among the other students, and even now, out of the corner of his ear, Seraphim heard his classmates discussing their couple. They are perplexed by what Liana could see in this nondescript guy. The girls think that they are not at all suitable for each other. Having gone home, Seraphim also began to think about this topic. In fact, he also could not understand why Liana liked him. Besides, he was worried about one more thing. His girlfriend was the first in academic performance, so he definitely wouldn't be able to enter the same university as her. Anxious thoughts began to swarm in his head, whether he was good enough for her. And just as he was thinking that he would like to be like the hero of some novel, a glow suddenly appeared above his head. The light becomes brighter and an unknown being appears from it, who immediately greets Seraphim and reports that the activation was successful. Out of fear, the young man hid behind the cupboard, telling the unknown creature not to come closer if it did not want to deal with his ruler. The creature gets angry and says that the system is not a joke, but the latest high-tech development of Planet X, where you need to complete the system's tasks, and for this it will reward the participant. However, she informs Seraphim that for now he is a regular user, and in order to become her master and own the system, he will need to pass a test. And he adds that the system already gives him the first task, which includes following his words and entering the top 10 students in the class. Seraphim is perplexed as to how he is supposed to do this. He can only get into the top 10 worst, but the creature reminds him that the young man himself said how much he wants to achieve this. But if he does not complete the task, the system will delete itself. The main character was scared not only because he had been given an impossible task, he wanted to know if this flying girl would disappear along with the system. But the creature replied that she was not a devil, so she could not give him impossible tasks. Having said this, she directed an orange beam at Seraphim, which completely covered the young man. She gave him a free beginner's pack. It would expire in a month, and how far Seraphim could advance would depend on his willingness to work. Having finished the phrase, she said goodbye and disappeared into space, leaving the hero alone. Seraphim immediately decided to get into the system and try to find out more about all this. Suddenly he saw a column that mentioned that the system had given him a brilliant memory. And of course, the young man immediately wanted to check it out. Taking the book and reading about a couple of pages, he was delighted. It all turned out to be true. He remembered everything. Continuing to admire what was happening, he suddenly came to the idea that if he did not complete the task, the system would immediately delete everything, and it turns out that he would simply have to continue living as before. Seraphim understands that when faced with ridicule and claims, he will be unable to do anything but endure or run away. But he understands that he doesn't want to put up with this anymore, because he finally has a chance to change his destiny. The hero must seize it. It is almost 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and his exam will start tomorrow at 9 in the morning. To be in shape, he needs at least 3 hours of sleep. As a result of these calculations, he comes to the conclusion that he has 14 hours to prepare. In 15 seconds, he read and memorized 2 pages, spending a minute on 8 pages. In an hour, he will learn 480 if he can remember all the answers to the questions on Chinese and mathematics that may come up on the test tomorrow. If he succeeds, then he will increase his level of knowledge by 100 points, and it is even quite possible that he will be able to score 600 points. The best student in his class had a score of 650 points, but if he could get 600 points, he would be in the top 10. At 8 o'clock in the evening, he went to have dinner, and even at this time, he did not look up from his textbook. Even his mother reprimanded him for putting the book down while eating. When the woman came to her son at 1 o'clock in the morning, she also found him sitting with a book. She reminded him that he had a test tomorrow, so it was time to go to bed. It was approaching 3 in the morning, but Seraphim still didn't go to bed, but simply continued reading under the blanket with a flashlight. Suddenly, a fairy appeared. She noticed how the young man was diligently studying, while before him 1,072 of his predecessors had failed. After all, even having received the strongest ability, without hard work, it is impossible to achieve anything. Only those who are ready to work hard have the chance to experience this strongest system. As a result, the next day, already sitting in class, Seraphim was not in the best physical shape. He liked studying so much that he studied all night, even though he wanted to sleep. But still his efforts were not in vain. He looked at each question and remembered the answers to them. Liana, noticing that her boyfriend looked tired, decided to ask if he was confident in his abilities. Looking at the girl with a tired look, but at the same time smiling contentedly, he said that he was sure that now he would break into the top 10. His companion was a little embarrassed. She didn't understand what was wrong with him. It seemed to her that he had changed somehow. The rest of the students heard this phrase. Muffled laughter could be heard throughout the class, and someone even choked on their drink. Noticing this, Seraphim felt a little awkward. He himself had already managed to understand how overconfident it sounded. Liana blushed a little and, smiling, told the guy that she believed in him. She stood up and, having collected her things, said goodbye to Seraphim as she was going to the exam, and finally suggested that they meet later and have lunch together. The young man waved his hand at her, while behind him, louder laughter could be heard again. The guys were discussing whether Seraphim was ashamed to be such a clown. Realizing that he was being discussed behind his back again, the main character wanted to just put on headphones out of habit so as not to hear it. But suddenly, out of anger and resentment, he squeezed the earphone. The question of whether he was worthy of dating Liana sounded in his head again. He wanted with all his heart to show everyone what he was really worth. By this time, the exam versions had already been handed out in the class, and the observer watching the class walked around the room and thought about how there were so many weak kids in this class, and there was no one here who would take the exam seriously. At that moment, Seraphim was glad of the option he received. It turned out to be one of those questions that he had learned the previous night. The difference was only in one meaning. He also knew the answers to the other questions on the form. He couldn't believe that everything except the numbers remained unchanged. Seraphim understands that in this case 600 points are nothing. He was already sure that he would receive even more than 650 points. The observer noticed how Mr. Clive was completing all the tasks suspiciously quickly. She decided to carefully look over his shoulder to make sure he wasn't cheating and ended up being very surprised. 4 days later, Seraphim came to class and again received a tease from his deskmate named Ian, who again reminded him of the phrase about the top 10. He considered the young man to be the class's biggest braggart, telling him that everyone was waiting for his next joke. Noting that it was his own fault that everyone was laughing at him, Seraphim objected to him, saying that everyone was simply jealous of him, since he and Liana were together, and therefore they were making him the scapegoat. Finally, the teacher came into the classroom with a huge pile of papers, and after carrying them to the table, she simply threw them on it. It was obvious that the teacher was displeased. She mentioned in an irritated voice that it was just a trial exam that tested their readiness and that they had gone through all the assignments in class. At this point, she could no longer restrain herself and screamed at the whole class because she did not expect her students to write it so badly, and she wanted to know if they could not pull themselves together in a critical situation. Then how were they going to enter college? She calls the students one by one, announcing the results and handing over their exam forms. Finally, she called the class's top student, David Frith, who scored 653 points, placing him second in the class and 72nd overall. David went to his desk in confusion, while everyone began to whisper among themselves and guess who in their class had come out on top, and everyone became a little tense because there was only one person left whose results had not been announced. Finally, the teacher announced Seraphim. He scored 702 points, came in first place in the class, and second overall. The young man went to get his form, satisfied, while everyone in the class, including the teacher, was perplexed by what was happening. The teachers at the Livonian school were already discussing the results of the trial exam. They were surprised how such a weak student ended up among the best. Someone suggested that the young man was definitely cheating, since the teacher had never seen a student become smarter so quickly. The teacher thought, even if the student had the opportunity to look at the reference materials during the exam, he would hardly have been able to score 700 points right away. Another teacher also thought about this, because it is impossible to find the answer to a question in a book if you have no idea where the necessary material is. And this means that the student really prepared hard. Suddenly, the deputy director loudly slammed a stack of papers on the table and loudly ordered that the topic be closed. And then he asked each of the teachers to make up a new exam version, since he wanted this notorious student to take the test again tomorrow. The next day, sitting in class, Seraphim had already managed to think that it seemed like everyone had already forgotten what happened yesterday. And what was also great was that he still remembered all the material he had learned. By this time, his memory had become even better. Suddenly, the teacher entered the classroom and asked Seraphim to go with her to the teacher's room. He hadn't even set foot outside the classroom before his classmates immediately began discussing his trip to the teacher's room, assuming that he had been caught cheating after all. Entering the teacher's room, he quickly knocked and greeted all the teachers and class teachers. The deputy director immediately suggested that he not beat around the bush and immediately stated that some teachers doubted that he had written this exam honestly. There are those who do not believe in him, and so he personally arranged for Seraphim to retake the test. The young man asked, a little irritated, if he was really the only one who would retake this exam. Another teacher had already carefully pulled out a chair for the student, telling him not to think that they doubted his abilities. He just needs to perceive the retake as an opportunity to improve his knowledge. Seraphim sat down at the table discontentedly, asking if this kind teacher, who was saying such nice things, thought that he was actually cheating. But one way or another, the hero was not worried. He learned all the questions, so he was not afraid of retaking the test. But after taking a closer look at the form, Seraphima suddenly panicked. It turned out that the teacher had prepared new assignments for him, so that the young man would definitely not have the opportunity to cheat. Even though he hadn't cheated on the practice exam, if he made a mistake now and couldn't solve these problems, he would be unfairly accused of lying, and then, out of nowhere, a fairy appeared. She greeted Seraphim and congratulated him on completing his first task. The teacher noticed how the student seemed to freeze in place, and already thought that perhaps the child was frightened by the list of questions. But suddenly, the young man hits the table and declares that everything is fine and he is ready to receive his reward. The teacher has a vague belief in his abilities and still considers him a bad student, and his behavior is proof of this. An hour and a half later, he picked up the paper and told the teacher that he was finished with chemistry. An hour and a half later, he handed the examination paper to the math teacher. The entire teaching staff immediately crowded around the teacher to find out whether the student had completed the task. The teacher replied that she was not sure about chemistry because she had not written the questions, but in all likelihood the answers were correct. But the mathematics is written without errors. Clear answers, correct solutions. She confirms that it is undoubtedly a magnificent piece of work. One of the teachers starts to get even angrier. If he knew that this was for Seraphim the flower, he would have made the tasks even more difficult so that he wouldn't show off. The teacher adjusted his glasses and asked the other teachers not to worry. Because the student would have to work hard in physics, there were such difficult questions that even the best of the best could not answer them. Seraphim begins to get irritated by these conspirators, since he can hear them all perfectly well. In the end, he turns around and smiles, saying that he did everything. The last task took a little more than 30 minutes. The teacher smugly took the work and, after looking at it, was shocked. He did not believe that the student had spent less than 30 minutes on such a difficult task. The entire teaching staff understands that at one point, they were so focused on checking assignments that they did not notice how he easily solved all the assignments in half an hour. Did he really answer the questions faster than the teacher? It seems like it wasn't luck. Maybe he had been deliberately showing bad results before. The indignant teacher almost pounced on the student, wanting to know if he had solved the last problem himself. Seraphim laughs and says that he doesn't understand what the teacher is talking about because he was under supervision the whole time, who, in their opinion, he could ask for an answer. The teacher chuckles awkwardly and explains that he is simply confused and talks about how glad he is that Seraphim got the highest score. He also adds that it would be a big mistake if this student does not understand how to participate in a physics competition. The young man wants to know whether competitions give extra points for entrance exams, and the teacher gives him a positive answer. Seraphim comes to the conclusion that then he will be able to become the second best student and get into any university. The teacher also confirms his words. But suddenly the sparkle in the student's eyes disappears, and to the teacher's surprise, he says that it is not particularly important to him and he will not participate. And if there are no more questions for him, he asks to leave. Having said this, he quickly headed towards the exit. Walking down the corridor, Seraphim thinks about how good it is that he completed the first system task and received a reward. However, he doubts that everything will be easier from now on. 3 hours ago, he received the award and immediately felt as if his mental abilities had improved. From the depths of his thoughts, he was pulled by the voice of Liana, who was also walking down the corridor and noticed her companion. Seraphim, without thinking, headed towards her, wondering what she was doing on the 6th floor. It turns out that she found out that he was called to the teacher's room and wanted to ask if everything was okay with him. The young man immediately admitted to her that he was forced to retake the exam. Everyone thinks that he could not have increased his level of knowledge in such a short time, and the young man himself would like to know if Liana believes him. The girl approached him and gently cupped his face in her hands, looking him straight in the eyes. She declared that they could think whatever they wanted, but she believed in him. Even though his progress is truly incredible, she knows he wouldn't lie to her. Seraphim is pleased to hear this, but he still wants to know if she really thinks so. Liana blushes even more and says that if he continues in the same spirit, then they will be able to enter the same university. Seraphim was already preparing to embrace his beloved when a teacher came out of the teacher's room, muttering under his breath that the student was clearly not telling him everything. And if he was so smart, then why was he afraid to take part in the competition? Raising his head and seeing how close the young man was to the girl, the teacher pulled him up and immediately began to scold him for his inappropriate behavior at school. Seraphim doesn't understand what the problem is because he didn't do anything like that, but everything is serious with Liana. The teacher becomes even more furious because the student does not understand what the problem is. The teacher is angry because what kind of relationship can there be? They are still school children, and their studies can suffer from such love. The young man decides to ask him one question: where he is on the list in terms of academic performance. Gritting his teeth, the teacher answers him that he is second. Then the question turned to Liana, and the teacher had to answer that the girl was in first place. Seraphim throws up his hands and does not understand how, in such a case, the teacher can still doubt that the relationship has a negative impact on their academic performance. Liana couldn't help but laugh. The teacher clearly didn't like it and asked the young man not to talk nonsense. He decides to remind the student that his place in the overall standings has not yet been confirmed. Seraphim objects because the deputy director approved the results of his retake, and, apparently, the teacher suspects the student of conspiring with him. The teacher asks not to pick on his words. He thinks that there is something suspicious about the fact that he does not want to participate in the physics competition, which means that he definitely cheated. Liana couldn't stand it and decided to stand up for her boyfriend, asking teacher Leon to stop insulting his students. Suddenly, the young man takes her by the shoulder and, looking into her eyes, winks, saying that Leon has a reason for this. In any case, after everything the teacher said, he still wants Seraphim to take part in the competition, and the young man wants to know if this is true. The student is ready to do this, but only on one condition: if teacher Leon makes a bet with him. If he loses, he will do whatever the teacher asks of him, but if he wins, Leon will have to treat their entire class to chicken. The teacher was a little taken aback. He was calculating in his head how much money he would have to spend in case of loss to buy a chicken for 50 people. Seraphim never tires of goading him, saying that at first he accused him of dishonestly passing the exam, and now he is also afraid to enter into an argument with him. In the end, after thinking a little more, the teacher finally agrees to this bet. A few more days passed and the physics competition finally ended. It was raining heavily outside that day, and all the students wanted to quickly take their seats on the bus. Teacher Mary, who was sitting on the bus, was clearly not in the best mood. She doubted that good results could be expected from these students, but in practice it was true. The Livonian school had never been strong in such competitions. The teacher who was supposed to be the team leader took the day off and asked Mary to replace him. It seems the school doesn't really care about the competition. The teacher was upset not only because she had to replace another teacher, but also because she lost to a new teacher named Lucinda Maxwell. But she still thinks that no matter how much experience Lucinda has as a classroom teacher, her students will still be far from hers. 5 days later, the teacher's room was again more crowded. Among the students, there were Liana and Seraphim, and the young man decided to ask the girl why only they were invited here. Liana suggested that perhaps they wanted to announce the results of the competition to them. The deputy director finally made sure that everyone was now gathered and already wanted to give the floor to the director. Noticing that the students are whispering among themselves, Mary cannot restrain herself and begins to scold them because they imagined that if they earned a lot of points, then now they have the right not to listen while the teacher is talking to them. Mary then looked sarcastically at teacher Lucinda, as if hinting that her students were behaving inappropriately. Seraphim, seeing this picture, decided to intervene in the conversation, saying that he did not understand what teacher Mary was talking about, and that he did not think that they behaved disrespectfully towards the teacher. Mary noticed that Seraphim and Liana were holding hands and decided to remind them that students were forbidden from being in relationships. But here they were walking arm in arm. All eyes immediately turned to teacher Lucinda. Seraphim realized that Mary was not getting along with their class teacher, so she decided to take it out on her students. The young man realized that he needed to act. He raised his and Liana's hands up and loudly announced that they were dating. And what he did next, no one expected at all. Seraphim pointed to the director and said that he knew everything about it and was not at all against it. The director even choked on his drink at this news. He didn't remember saying anything like that. Seraphim continues. The director promised that if they take a prize place in the physics competition, then they will be able to officially date. The young man understands that if Mary wants to turn all the teachers against him, this will not happen. The deputy director decided to intervene, and winking at the director, said that he was also aware of this agreement. The director slapped himself on the forehead and pretended that he remembered how they had discussed it, and that the school was ready to allow a lot for such a wonderful student as Seraphim. Now that he had the support of many teachers, he felt his complacency growing with every passing second. Mary tries to object to the director, but he interrupts her and asks to let him now announce the important news. It turns out that their school took first and second place in the physics competition. First place went to Seraphim Clive from class 3-3, and second place went to Liana Solis from class 3-1. The principal solemnly begins to clap his hands and wants everyone to praise the students and congratulate them on their victory. Mary hears how everyone starts applauding, and she can't believe that Seraphim won this competition. And she is also finished off by the fact that one of the teachers congratulated Lucinda on winning the competition. She had never heard of him before this incident, and she suspects that Liana could not have trained him so well. And if Mary had been the head of the third grade, then all the congratulations would have gone to her, not Lucinda. She was overcome with envy. Mary felt sick at the thought of why Lucinda was so lucky. As everyone was leaving the conference room, teacher Leon stopped Seraphim. The teacher smiled and reminded them that their bet was still on, and he would be happy to buy a chicken for their class. The young man was a little surprised because he didn't think that the teacher would take him seriously after all. He was just joking about the bet. Leon objects. It was a fair argument, and he must keep his word because the teacher cannot do otherwise. Seraphim realizes that the teachers don't seem to be trying to make life difficult for their students. It's just possible that they can be a little impatient and persistent at times. Already in class, Mary scolded her class for making so many mistakes in such simple questions. She wants them to follow the example of Seraphim from class 3-3 because it took him only a month of preparation to take first place. A contented Seraphim sitting in class continues to think about teachers and understands that sometimes they are simply worried about their academic performance. Mary continued to be angry with her class. She wanted them to follow the example of the winning student, because after passing the exams, he also took part in a competition where he won first place. Leon still kept his promise, and the whole class went to eat the goodies together. Mary did not finish her tirade. She shouted that among her students, there were simply no such hard-working students as Seraphim. The school children noticed that their teacher had already mentioned this Seraphim 10 times. If they hadn't known, they would have thought that he was her student. One of the students sitting at the back of the class even seriously wondered who this Seraphim Clive was. The fairy appeared to the student again and said that since he had successfully completed the first mission, and therefore as a reward she would grant him the ability to quickly comprehend, now he would be able to solve the assigned tasks in an instant. Seraphim was delighted, and from then on any task was within his power. As he was leaving the classroom, Ian tried to stop him, wanting to know if he was going home. The young man confirms and asks why his classmate is not going home. The fat man reminds him that today they will have a match with the first grade, and from the third parallel, Seraphim plays basketball the best, and if he does not go with them, then they will definitely lose. The young man doesn't want to take part in this at all, so he starts making excuses that he's been so busy lately and has almost forgotten about basketball. But seeing how upset Ian is, he picks him up and, holding him, says that it's time for them to go out onto the field and smash their opponents to smithereens. They arrived at the field where they were immediately greeted by their team members. But his rivals also noticed him. One of them, named Frank Kishp, addressed the Seraphim class as scum and wanted to know if they were ready for defeat. The young man was just changing into his uniform and asked Frank to chat less, since they had gathered there to play, not to chat. The opponent supports him, because time is not limited, and the one who first scores 50 points wins. The game has begun. Frank is dribbling the ball and quickly passing one opponent after another. He breaks sharply and quickly throws the ball into the basket. Now the score is 2-0 in their favor. The opposing team didn't understand how this sudden attack happened, Was this Frank really ready to kill for the ball? Ian wants to know why Seraphim is just watching this, while Frank turns to them and tells them to continue to stand aside, because that way he will definitely beat them. The main character asks his classmate not to worry, while he watched Frank dribble the ball and move forward. Then the young man felt the same as when solving problems. He seemed to feel inspired, and his brain began to think faster. His dribbling technique and the way he was able to get past defenders, Seraphim sees how to improve his movements and how to correct the mistakes he makes while dribbling the ball. And it seems he has already found the key to solving whether it is possible that the ability given to him by the system also works during basketball. Frank takes the ball away from the opponent again. He exclaims that the third grade does not seem to be so good. He advises them to try using the blocked shot. But suddenly, out of nowhere, Seraphim appears in front of him. He deftly snatches the ball and begins to dribble it. One of the opponents tried to trip him, but the young man jumped up and threw the ball forward. The ball went straight into the basket. Ian couldn't believe it. He watched his friend's game and saw that he played exactly like Frank. Only Seraphim's throw was stronger and faster. The whole team immediately rushed to him to support him and asked the young man how he saw and immediately learned the opponent's technique. Meanwhile, Frank was angry at his teammates, calling them losers, since no one stopped this brat who was throwing the ball. But the players don't agree with his claims. Why does he blame only them? Because in fact, Seraphim stole his technique of ball control. The game continues, and Frank, back on the field, shouts at the third grade not to get cocky, because they have only just started the game. Seraphim chuckled and declared that although Frank didn't understand it, the game was almost over. After another 30 minutes, almost all of the opponents were lying on the field, exhausted. The protagonist reports that the score is currently 47-2 in their favor, and thinks that they need to go easy on the opposing team. But he notices that the opponents have even stopped resisting. Then Seraphim decides that it is time to test himself. He is interested in what his limit is. He moved further away and started aiming. Frank noticed this and was shocked. His opponent was standing 3 steps beyond the three-point line. Seraphim understood that this throw would probably be 100% successful. Both teams were simply watching this with bated breath and saw the moment when the ball hit the hoop from such a distance. After that, Seraphim already realized that the game was over and was about to leave. Finally, he wants to know if the opponents are still ready to play with them because it's just a waste of time. And he compliments this with the phrase that next time they could only play with him. The next day, Frank lost all his mood to play because of Seraphim. At the same time, many players on the court were happily throwing the ball into the basket. A player named Brown Cole was throwing one ball after another, and with a couple more throws, the number of hits would exceed 100. Brown spotted Frank behind the field's bars and invited him to come out and play with them. But Frank rejects his offer because he has no desire at all. The young man wants to know if he really lost with a score of 50-0. Frank shyly says that if he were as talented as Brown, he would not have given Seraphim a break. The young man thought about it because he had heard this name somewhere before, and even supposedly knew that this student was in the 3rd grade. Brown recalled that this might be the student Mrs. Lucinda had told their class about. And his classmates also constantly talk about Seraphim. Now he has to hear this name even after school. It infuriates him that this young man is now everywhere he looks. Brown throws the ball away and asks Frank to tell him about his game with Seraphim yesterday. A little later, Ian and Seraphim were walking along the basketball court, and the main character asked his friend to go first, and he would wait for Liana. And then, out of nowhere, a basketball, perhaps intentionally thrown at him, rushed straight at the young man. Brown and Frank were standing on the court, clearly waiting for the young man. Frank introduces Seraphim Brown as the point guard for their high school team and the best player in Livonia City. He heard that the young man wanted to compete with someone in throwing the ball, so Brown made time for it. Seraphim admits that he does not want to compete and, throwing the ball back, announced that he is leaving. Brown caught the ball and wanted to know if the young man was really dating the school's #1 beauty, Liana Solis, because he didn't understand what she saw in him. He suggests that the girl might have some kind of vision problem since she can't see what a weakling her boyfriend is. Seraphim headed for the exit and declared that they would not be able to provoke him. At this time, the students had already crowded around the court and were watching the confrontation between the two guys. They realized that it looks like someone is clearly trying to fight the ball god. Seraphim decided to find out what Brown wants from him. He wants them to play, and when he loses, he will no longer be able to appear on the field and will also break up with Liana. The main character began to warm up. He agreed to this bet and indicated that they would play until 10 points. But if his opponent loses, he wants Brown to call him Big Brother. The young man agreed, but said that first the guy would have to defeat him. The spectators expected Brown to win this bet because he is the best scorer among high school students in the province. They do not understand how Seraphim dared to challenge him. Meanwhile, Mr. Cole had already scored the first goal. Seeing this, all the girls blushed a little and began to support the young man. Brown didn't stop, but demonstrated how he accurately hit the hoop from different points. Everyone saw that the young man was in great shape as always, and he was able to throw the ball into the basket 9 times out of 10. They even suggest that it would have been better for Seraphim to give up right away and not disgrace himself. Brown threw the ball into the protagonist's hands and declared that it was now his turn. The young man took a stance, and concentrating and measuring the distance, he launched the ball. All the spectators were surprised because the ball was spinning too much in the air. The ball went through the ring and, falling to the floor, the ball bounced back and landed right into Seraphim's hands. Everyone was shocked by this reception, as they had not placed any special hopes on the young man. They then watched as 9 balls were already in the basket, and the player did not even move from his spot. Brown didn't understand what the hell was going on. It didn't even look like a Superman. The students noticed that, unlike Brown, who was constantly running after the ball, Seraphim seemed to have a much more relaxed control of the ball, and they considered him a real basketball god. Before the opponent's final throw, Brown visibly tensed up, wondering if Seraphim would really score all 10 goals. While preparing to throw, the protagonist noticed that the basketball coach, Mr. Sions, was standing with the students. This made him wary because he just wants to go to the same college as Liana. And the main thing is that he is no longer forced to take part in various competitions, like then in physics. And after thinking about it, he throws the ball and, to everyone's surprise, misses the basket. Seraphim looks at Brown and, laughing, announces that it looks like they have a draw. At this moment, Mr. Sions comes forward and asks the young man to come with him to the deputy director's office. Frank at this time confesses to Brown how worried he was and had already believed that the guy was invincible. But you can't fool the best player. He saw that his opponent missed on purpose. The young man noticed how Seraphim looked at their coach and then threw a slanted 3-pointer. Frank does not believe that the enemy simply wanted to preserve Brown's reputation. Mr. Cole noted that it was rare to meet such easygoing people as Seraphim. And after all this, the young man even began to respect him. Already standing in front of the teacher's room, the main character thought, the lessons were over. Why did the deputy director suddenly call him? Entering the room, he immediately saw the deputy, who greeted the student and told him to sit down, stating that while everyone was gathered, they could begin. The teacher invited the best students of the school here, but noted that every year among the best there are always those who did not pass the entrance exams. So they and the teachers decided that the deputy director would lead the strongest group and would conduct intensive extra classes for them after school. They had even warned their parents. Seraphima was not particularly happy with this news because it meant that he would also have to go to this study group. He was distracted by Liana, who noticed her boyfriend and greeted him sweetly. Seeing her, Seraphim realized that now he wouldn't be so bored here. Many students, on the contrary, took this news joyfully because their teachers had brought them to the top. The deputy continued, speaking and drawing the students' attention to the sheets of paper with assignments in front of them. He himself identified 2 reasons why high scorers from previous years most often failed the exams. Firstly, they spent a lot of time solving the problem. The rest of the tasks did not cause any difficulties. But solving one took them too much time, so they did not have time to complete the work. Secondly, they misunderstood the question posed in the assignment. Some students gave a detailed solution, but upon receiving the results, they realized that they had made a mistake that affected the entire assignment, which is why they lost points. While all the students were looking through the assignments, Seraphim called the deputy director and suggested to him that if he could prove that the assignments were not difficult and that it was entirely possible to solve them for the highest score, if he succeeded, then he could allow him not to attend these classes anymore. The students didn't like this attack. They think that Seraphim is a presumptuous kid. After all, the deputy said that the problems are solvable. It's just that a lot of time was spent on them. Liana decides to join the conversation. She points out that Seraphim can prove it because, in fact, he won first place in the physics competition. Besides, she is absolutely sure that he will also quickly cope with the assigned tasks. The student objects to her because she was always 20 points ahead of the second-best student in school, and Seraphim is an unknown person, plus the competitions, in his opinion, are not even close to the entrance exams. Liana again begins to stand up for her boyfriend and says that he can do everything. The deputy is trying to separate the arguing school children because they are here to study, and at the same time he wants to know why they are arguing with each other in the first place. The teacher recalled how Seraphim had shown himself during the retake of the exam. He solved the problems quite quickly and correctly, and in this case he thinks that his experience can be useful to the children, so the deputy asks him to share it with them. The young man was about to object to his deputy, but he reminded him that when the question of his relationship with Liana had come up that time, he and the director had supported him. Seraphim pauses, his cheeks quickly starting to turn red, and he thanks the teacher for his generosity that time. The deputy assures that the student can be calm because he is always on the student's side and is confident that everyone in this room will listen to his point of view, so he asks Seraphim to speak freely and confidently. The young man decides to give it a try and begins to explain that, in his opinion, more practice is needed to achieve greater speed in solving problems. But they can improve their skills by memorizing problem-solving samples in advance. This is something like a software algorithm of actions. When before the main one, there is also a preliminary process. Having learned in advance the sample solution of problems, they significantly improve the efficiency of their work. For example, they might take a genetics problem that is worth an average amount of points and take some time, so it is challenging. Similar problems are taught in high school. They have 16 specific ways of developing a situation, including various combinations, for which you need to make up several possible solutions and remember the formulas. And when this problem comes up, it can be solved in a shorter time. One of the students objects, because this method requires remembering a lot of things, and if, for example, they don't get such a task, they will simply waste time. Seraphim suggests that everyone choose the best option for themselves: mechanical memorization before the exam or wasting time during the exam. The deputy liked the young man's version because the advantages of this method are enormous. Students will be able to spend 3 seconds instead of 30 to solve the task. Next, Seraphim suggests that in order to avoid confusion in the question itself and to highlight the necessary information, simply write out the solution on a separate sheet and use the formula to solve it. He compares it to a game of chess. It is one thing to put a checkmate in check and another to do a checkmate. He believes that those who go beyond their capabilities will be able to handle any task. But the students doubt that it is worth so much effort and even the reality of it. The deputy believes that there is common sense in Seraphim's words. Of course, the students are not obliged to follow everything he advised, but there are some things that are worth listening to. Suddenly, the young man felt some strange feeling, and out of nowhere, he heard a notification that the system had given him a new ability called the Feynman method of studying. A month later, at the next meeting of the best students, the deputy congratulated Seraphim because he had overtaken all the students in the school and finally took first place in the trial exam. The hero turns to the teacher and says that he should thank him for these merits. This time he managed to finish the test 10 minutes before the allotted time, and thanks to this, he became more confident about the entrance exams. Another student also shared his experience that after working with a group for 2 weeks on exam versions, he feels that he has a better understanding of the idea of working on complex questions. Seraphim chuckles and replies that he is only too happy to help everyone. But he is sure to himself that none of the guys without a system like his will be able to reach his level. To his surprise, he notices that Liana is acting somehow distant, and there's a clear expression of sadness on her face. He wants to find out from her what's wrong. Maybe she's angry that he overtook her in the school exam. But Liana replies that this is not the case, and she is very happy for him. Seraphim still tries to find out why she feels bad, but the girl only denies it. Then the guy takes more drastic measures and, grabbing Liana by the hands, asks that if she cares about his feelings, then she should tell him the truth. Meanwhile, the deputy declares today's meeting over and all the students except a couple begin to quickly get ready. Left alone, Seraphim once again asks her to tell him everything, and this time Liana agrees. She quietly tells him that they might not be able to get into the same college. Yesterday, her mother suddenly told her that she wanted Liana to study abroad. The girl is worried because she was already anticipating that when Seraphim's grades improve, they will be able to continue studying together. The young man was also alarmed by this news, but he tries to calm Liana down, saying that they will definitely come up with something. They both end up at an appointment with Miss Devona Solis. Liana tries to start a conversation and addresses her as Auntie. Devona laughs because she allows herself to be called Auntie because she is not one of those old-fashioned mothers who forbids her child from dating. Besides, she trusts her daughter. It's immediately obvious from Liana that this conversation is difficult for her. However, despite the fact that Miss Solis is not against their relationship, she still believes that Liana needs to think about her future first. Miss Devona has a goal. She wants to give her daughter the best education. Seraphim listens to her and analyzes the situation, because thanks to the system, he now has access to the best education. He is sure that no university can compare with it. But there is a problem. He can't just go and tell everyone else about it, and besides, he's afraid that no one will believe him. Auntie suggests that if Liana's boyfriend came here to convince her, then she is ready to listen to him. Seraphim supports her and asks his girlfriend to let him talk to her mother. He begins his conversation by saying that he understands how Miss Devona is worried about her daughter, but he wants to know what she means by a good education. An honors degree or a well-equipped, expensive campus. The aunt smiles and replies that she doesn't think that this is the most important thing. She was interested in finding out what a good education includes, in the young man's opinion. Seraphim enthusiastically shouts out that this requires thinking people, masters of their craft. After all, they are the ones who form the foundation of education, and in their country they can also receive the best education. Devona, hearing his speech, clapped her hands. Noting that it was all said very well, she was simply amazed. But he still missed something. Seraphim guesses that he missed this important component of the connection. The young man activated the ability to anticipate the opponent's actions and received a rookie card. Devona confirms that everything is as he said. All the power is in the people. Miss deals 4 blows to all the opponent's followers. The woman notes that by maintaining communication with college friends, it will be easier for them in the adult world. The opponent discards the card Harsh Reality and hits the cards of Seraphim. The young man realizes that she made a powerful code, but accepts it. He turns to Devone and says that perhaps it will sound incorrect on his part, but he still wants to say that connections are acquired by those who have power. It might be really important for some people to make connections in college, but he and Liana don't need that. Miss Solis finds it funny. Usually those who are lower in status than her are afraid to even breathe next to her. She hasn't met such a young man as Seraphim for a long time. She notes that it is very rare for a high school student to show such courage. The young man even reminded her of himself in his youth. Liana was surprised by her mother's behavior. She had never seen her like this. Seraphim is glad that it seems his argument about the power being in people has found a response in his aunt's heart and perhaps things are going well. And then an interesting thought comes to his mind. He jumps up from the sofa and, turning to Devone, offers her to make a bet. Auntie decides to bring Seraphim down to earth a little, reminding him not to forget that he still has to go to school, and she doesn't want his outburst to affect his studies. Her hero promises that his studies will not suffer from this, because he wants to bet on his scores on the entrance exams. If he gets the maximum score, then she must promise that he will allow Liana to stay in China. If he fails, then he will do whatever she wants. Devona was perplexed by such speeches. She did not believe what the young man was saying. How could he get 750 points? He was clearly out of his mind. Seraphim admits that he understands that it is not easy at all, and no one has ever managed to get the highest score on the entrance exams before. But if he is not able to do even this, then how can he consider himself worthy of Liana? How will he then have the courage to ask her to stay with him? Devona replies that Seraphim surprised her in a good way at first, but she didn't expect him to think so highly of himself. But in the end, she agrees to make a bet. But if he loses, then she will think about whether he is worthy of her daughter. Liana tries to object to her mother, but Devona continues to be angry. She will not trust her daughter to such an egoist. Miss Devona stands up and replies that she is tired and asks her daughter to walk Seraphim to the door. Liana is worried, but the young man asks her not to worry, because he will be able to convince her mother. And it was already late anyway, and he was planning to leave anyway. As he heads for the door, he realizes he didn't think he would screw up like that. He blames the system and thinks he will never forgive it. Suddenly, a mandatory assignment was given, to bet with Liana's mother for the highest score on the entrance exams, and if the assignment was failed, then Seraphim would be subjected to school bullying because of his relationship with Liana, and would also take the punishment of having his brain cells processed and subsequently losing interest in the opposite sex. During evening classes, Ian decided to ask Seraphim if he was too confident in himself, since he had just recently taken first place in the mock exam, and now his whole appearance showed that he no longer needed to study. The main character asks him to think about what he is talking about. Seraphim reads the newspaper to improve his level of knowledge. His friend asks him to stop bragging because reading the news will not help him in any way. Seraphim objects that in order to get the highest score on the entrance exams, he needs to get 9 out of 10 points in the other subjects, including in essay writing. Already sitting at night in his room, a fairy suddenly appeared in front of the young man. He immediately decided to complain why she appeared only now. The creature clearly didn't like this. She doesn't want him to call the system stupid. Seeing the fairy's anger, the hero decides that it would be better for him to agree with her. But he really wants to find out what task the system gave him. The fairy doesn't understand what he's talking about, because no additional information is provided. But she told him that the system would not give him a task that he could not handle. Seraphim does not believe his ears. Could he really get the highest score on the entrance exams? But the fairy decides to remind him better. He recently won a basketball game, and she is here to give him a reward. This news could not but please Seraphim if he was given a new skill. Then it was not surprising that the system entrusted him with such a strange task. As a result, the system opened up a skill for him, Calligraphy Master. But this is not what the young man expected. How will it help him pass the entrance exams better than anyone else? Sitting in class, he is confident that he will be able to get the highest score. The main thing is to write the essay well. Using his ability to get along with people, he must write a great essay that can resonate with people's hearts and make them feel the result he wants to achieve. Finally, classes were over and Ian decided to see if Seraphim wanted to play ball with him. Mr. Clive declines the offer because today he wants to introduce Liana to his mother. Standing in front of the door, Liana admits to the guy that she is a little nervous. Seraphim tries to calm her down, saying that his mother is wonderful. He reminds her that he was not at all afraid when he went to meet her mother. But their conversation is interrupted by the hero's mother, who suddenly opens the door. The son decides to introduce her to his girlfriend, Liana, about whom he talked a lot there. The mother immediately thought about how pretty this girl was, and her eyes widened a little when she saw that her son and this girl were holding hands. She immediately picks up the girl and enthusiastically talks about how glad she is to meet her, and that her son is very lucky to study with such a wonderful classmate. Seraphim tensed up a little, as he couldn't remember the last time his mother had been so delighted. The rest of the evening goes quite smoothly, and they have a nice conversation over dinner. Seeing off the young people, the mother declares that she will wait again for Liana to come visit again. She reminds Seraphim a little sternly to take the girl to the car. Liana is very happy about this evening. She admits that he feels so at ease. The girl noticed that his mother is softer than hers. Seraphim is glad that his girlfriend liked it, and he invites her to come to them more often, and he will try to give it his all. Liana laughs and asks what he is talking about. The young man replies that he will get the highest score on the entrance exam. Several months later, Ivy Store greets everyone on her broadcast and announces that today is the last day of entrance exams. It shows how many parents gathered in the schoolyard. College entrance exams are really a big event for every family. Ivy was embarrassed by the reactions in the chat. Everyone was sending her hearts and writing that she was the best. Someone even asked her to marry him. Seraphim and Liana appear in the frame. The girl immediately pays attention to them. Ivy assumed that these two had already shot. She decides to greet them and find out how everything went. After all, how did they manage to do it so quickly? There was still a whole hour left before the end of the exam. Seraphim confesses to her that they simply wrote all the assignments and handed them in. Ivy is in shock. She already managed to think that they were expelled from the exam for some violation. The girl admits that it simply rarely happens that students submit their work on entrance exams so quickly, and she wants to know how difficult the assignments were this year. The guys laugh and answer that the questions weren't particularly difficult. Seraphim suggested that he would probably get a perfect score. Ivy was shocked. She thought he was joking. She decides to clarify whether he is sure that he was able to get the highest score in a foreign language. Seraphim decides to clarify. He means the highest score in all subjects. Ivy thanks them for their comments and says she'll go and interview the rest of the guys. After moving away a little, the girl exhales and thinks about what a strange guy he was. But this broadcast did not go unnoticed. Rumors about the arrogant young man were already spreading online. Even the Livonian school newspaper published an article about a senior student shouting loud words, which caused a wave of controversy. This news could not pass by the director, and he decided to call Seraphim. The director approached the young man and decided to say that the student had been careless. He suggests that he look at the news, which says that the interview at the Livonian school has caused a storm of indignation, with netizens hotly discussing the pompous and arrogant students of this school. Seraphim believes that reporters really know how to make mountains out of molehills. The director admits that if the matter had concerned someone else, then there would have been no problems. But it was Seraphim who came under attack. Although the exam results had not yet been announced, he had already become famous all over the internet. And he wants to know how the young man will now order the restoration of the school's reputation. Seraphim asks him not to worry. Perhaps he didn't choose his words well in the interview, but he spoke the truth. Their school won't have any problems. On the contrary, it will end up in first place in the rankings. It was time to mark the exam, and one of the examiners was amazed by the handwriting of one of the students. He was even more shocked by the fact that the exam was written without a single mistake. He even asked his supervisor to take a look at the essay. The manager can't believe his eyes. He doesn't believe this unusual construction of phrases. He has never seen a high school student write such an essay. He understands that this is an unusual piece of work. It shows the student's ambition and life philosophy, and the supervisor states that this work deserves the highest praise. The assistant wanted to object, but the head said that this would not be discussed. This work deserved a better rating, and that was it. A few days later, at the company where Ms. Solis worked, employees began discussing the fact that, according to inside information, one student had scored the maximum number of points in this year's college entrance exams. The colleague doesn't believe this. She wants to know where the employee got this information from. But he objected. Does it matter? In a few days, the results will be posted and the truth will be revealed. Miss Devona overheard this conversation and wondered if it could be about Seraphim Clive. Sitting on the couch in the Solis family's living room, Liana is a little embarrassed. But Seraphim says that sooner or later it would have happened. He brings his face closer to the girl and asks her permission to start. She agrees, and the young man, picking up his phone, wants to look at the results of the entrance exams, which have finally become publicly available. The room fell silent as Seraphim waited for the site to load. Liana closed her eyes in fear. Miss Devona suddenly entered the house and announced from the doorway that she had received some news that morning. Liana immediately ran joyfully to greet her mother. Devona blushed noticeably when she saw Seraphim in the room as well. The young man also stood up to greet Miss Solis and apologized in advance for the disturbance. Liana happily tells her mother that they finally learned the results of the exams. Devona asked if the young man wanted to tell her something, and then Seraphim solemnly showed her the website page, which indicated that he had taken first place and scored the maximum number of points on the exam. After that, he hesitated a little as he noticed that Devona didn't seem particularly surprised. But she already suspected in advance as soon as she heard her colleague's conversation. She already knew who this winner was. She told Seraphim that today's news had already reported on a student who had scored a record number of points on the exam. The young man didn't like it. These media outlets just don't give him a chance to breathe. Liana, a little afraid, asks her mother what she now wants to say about studying abroad. Devona, of course, allows her daughter to stay in China as she promised. Miss Solis was very surprised because the fact that Seraphim received the maximum score is amazing. But as it turned out, this was not enough to impress Miss Devona. What she really liked was that he showed courage and determination, as well as the ability to back up his words with actions. Approaching Seraphim, she firmly pats him on the shoulder and declares that from now on she trusts her daughter to him. The young man cannot help but rejoice. He confirms that she is entrusting her Liana into safe hands. While the boys were happy that everything had worked out, Devona was already thinking that in a few years, the young man would stop calling her auntie. Liana couldn't resist and threw herself on Seraphim's neck, shouting that she was glad because they had managed. But their jubilation is interrupted by Miss Solis, who decides to inform them that the boys must promise her something. She states that she does not want any grandchildren until she graduates from college. Liana and Seraphim immediately blushed. They did not believe that their aunt was telling them such things. Devona reminds them that they are still too young and she doesn't want to become a grandmother before they graduate from college. Liana rushes to her mother again to hug her and ask her to stop talking about becoming a grandmother. Seraphim decides to intervene and asks Miss Solis not to worry. He promises that this will not happen. He and Liana will not go that far until they graduate from college. Devona says he believes in young people. If he was able to get the highest score on the entrance exams, then he should keep this promise too. Seraphim made this promise and immediately began to hope that perhaps it would not be so difficult. At that moment, his mother called and he immediately picked up the phone to answer her. Mother calls him because she has already received several calls from the reception of different universities. She hesitantly tries to tell him about the scores for the exam. Hearing the hesitation in her voice, He decides to tell his mother the truth himself, that everything she is told is true. She can be proud of her son, because he became the first in the ranking of students who passed the entrance exams. The mother cannot hold back her tears and even covers her mouth with her hand from such shock. She recalled how she saw her son sitting with books and studying from morning until night. The mother recalls that the last few months must have been very difficult for her boy. She never expected Seraphim to get a perfect score. His father would be so proud of him. Her son reassures her that in the future she will have even more reasons to be proud of him. 2 days later, the young people met again in a more relaxed atmosphere. Seraphim immediately noted how good Liana looked. The girl was a little surprised to see her betrothed on a bicycle. Seraphim told her to jump on the trunk, and now they were racing down the street on this sunny day. As he drove down the street, the young man thought about how just a few months ago everyone had laughed at him and not taken him seriously. But now, when he and Liana passed by the group of students, no one laughed at him or said that he was not worthy of her. Liana decides to find out if Seraphim has thought about where he will apply. The young man says that his mother supports his decision to go to the same place as his girlfriend. As soon as they approached one of the buildings, they suddenly saw that ribbons were hanging on it with congratulations from Seraphim, a third-grade student at the Livonian school, who received the highest score on the entrance exams. Liana nudges him with her elbow, laughing at how pompously he is being congratulated. Seraphim was suddenly pulled up by the director, who informed him that the young man had done a huge favor to the Livonian school. The main character even feels a little awkward, and he tries to tell the director that this is not such a big event. But it was not to be. The entire teaching staff had already gathered to congratulate him. The young man becomes even more embarrassed. He doesn't know if he's even worthy of such an honor. The principal announces that for his outstanding performance in the entrance exams, the school has decided to give him a place on the honor board. Upon hearing this statement, all the teachers were a little shocked. Lucinda reflects on the fact that in the school's 40 years of existence, only 4 people have had this honor. This was awarded to a titan of the literary world, an internet giant who built his career from scratch, a politician who contributed to the development of their country, and an academic who achieved high results in scientific work. And now it's Seraphim's turn, and he's only 18 years old. The thought was lurking in Lucinda's head. Was it really possible that at his age he was already on the same level as such strong personalities? The teacher decides to check with the principal whether this is too big a reward. The director decides to ask her why the Wall of Honor is needed, and to demonstrate the greatness of their school, or to encourage their future students to strive for excellence. For years, their Wall of Honor has been a benchmark of social success, but those around them probably didn't realize that it was something like forbidden fruit for the students. If even a brilliant student like Seraphim can't take his place on the wall, then will anyone else be able to do it? Teacher Lucinda thought about it and came to the conclusion that it all sounded reasonable. In this case, the director declares that Seraphim Clive is worthy of being on the Wall of Honor. Everyone around him starts to applaud loudly, which makes the young man feel awkward, and he feels like he can't accept such an award. The director tries to convince him that everything he said here will really be in vain. He decides to whisper in the student's ear that thanks to him, their school received a grant for a tidy sum. And plus, for each person who is listed on the Wall of Honor, the grant is an even larger sum of money. The main character even lost the power of speech from such amounts. But at the same time, these speeches inspired Seraphim, and now he considers it his duty to serve as an example for other students. The director is pleased, because this is exactly the ambitious approach he expected from him. And the headmaster also said that Seraphim would need to do something later, so he should be ready. He says that the media wants to interview him, so he must not let his alma mater down and perform well. The director heard that it would be held live and would gather a lot of viewers in front of the screens, because Seraphim was, after all, the first in the history of college entrance exams to receive the maximum score. Journalists have already gathered in the conference room. The first interview they take is with the principal, who says that this year their school was able to achieve excellent results once again. Until it was Seraphim's turn, he was thinking about how it was possible to give a grant for such a large sum of money for literally nothing. Finally, the interviewer reaches him. She wants to know if he has anything to say to the younger generation. The young man immediately hesitated because he couldn't say that they didn't have a system like his. Although in theory the system is only half the battle, he was able to achieve such results also thanks to the skills given to him. If you think about it, what helped him the most was that the system's tasks were mandatory to complete. If he didn't work until he was exhausted every time, he would be able to use his skills to their full potential. He is going to give one piece of advice and states that you shouldn't be afraid to lose face. Seraphim knew that at first many people would laugh at him, and to be honest, he was a little scared. And he thought that if he didn't try, he wouldn't lose. He thought that people don't even realize how often they repeat these words. Although you want to confess your feelings for someone, you are afraid to look them in the eye. You're afraid to act at the crucial moment and blame yourself for it. You're afraid to fail the exam, and so on. He believes that one should make it a habit to tell oneself that I am determined, which means that I can handle it. So the goal will not seem so unattainable, of course. He himself would not have achieved such a result without luck and the help of others. But there is something he still wants to share that will serve as support for young people in the future. The secret is that he is not afraid to fall in the eyes of others. At that moment, many students were watching this live broadcast, and they listened attentively to what Seraphim was saying. Suddenly, the young man heard a strange notification from the system. It congratulates Seraphim. For the love of fans, he received 10,000 points. And now the lottery has been successfully launched. While in his living room, the main character listened attentively to the fairy, who explained that he had one chance to win the lottery. She wants to know if he confirms the launch of the lottery. Seraphim happily agrees to this. The creature happily announces that the young man has won the brilliant idea skill. The main character immediately became interested in what this skill entailed. The fairy explains that one day physicists discovered the structure of the benzene ring, and mathematicians constructed a regular pentagon. Nowadays, students understand all these things, but in the past, these were real scientific discoveries, or, in other words, brilliant ideas. Seraphim is full of enthusiasm and wants to try out his new skill as soon as possible. The fairy leaves the young man alone with the tasks of the top 5 mathematical hypotheses. Seraphim gathers his strength and begins to activate the brilliant idea ability. Hours passed, and only in the evening was he able to finish his calculations a little. Suddenly, someone knocked on the front door, and Mom immediately entered the room, because it was already 5 in the evening, and she had no idea who it could be behind the door since they weren't expecting anyone. Seraphim already wanted to get up and open the door himself, but his mother told him to continue working, and she herself would open it and see who had come to them. Opening the door, the woman saw a tall, thin man wearing glasses who was asking if Seraphim Clive lived there. The man decides to introduce himself. His name is Raj Gable. He's the chairman of the admissions committee at Anna University, and he would like to know which college Seraphim has chosen. The mother was speechless as to why the chairman of the admissions committee at Anna's university had come in person. She kindly invites Raj to come in, and the chairman has already managed to see this silent question in her eyes and hastened to answer that he is here personally because her son is a special applicant. And suddenly there was another knock at the door. Another man was standing in the threshold and asking if Seraphim Clive lived here. He came on behalf of the admissions committee of Taekock University. But upon seeing Raj, the man's gaze immediately changed from friendly to angry. He starts an offensive and immediately wants to know if he wants to lure Seraphim to his university. You could say he caught his colleague red-handed. Raj wanted to say something, but the enemy threw some papers at his feet. While Raj was looking at the papers, a representative from Taekock University approached the boy's mother, introducing their university as the best in the country. They have the best campus and living conditions, and the teachers are simply beyond compare. And it will be the best decision if the mother entrusts her son to them. Raj overhears that his rival promises that if Seraphim chooses their university, his scholarship will be 300,000 yuan. The representative had already handed the documents to the mother, saying that all she needed was a couple of signatures. Raj can no longer give up his position, and he grabs Seraphim by the shoulders and says that if his choice falls on Anna University, then he will personally arrange for the young man to receive a scholarship of millions of yuan. The opponent froze in amazement when he heard the amount of scholarship his rival had offered. Raj continues to press the young man. If he is not satisfied with this amount, then he can offer his own. And in general, if he enters Anna University, then he can ask him for anything. Seraphim finally managed to say that, in fact, he and his girlfriend decided to enroll in the same university. Raj starts talking about how his girlfriend will be able to choose any direction, and their master's studies will be free for them, and they will also be able to put them in the same dorm, and that they will also be able to agree on her scholarship. Raj's rival is simply indignant. He asks his colleague if they even have the right to do this. The top of the best includes dozens of students in the country, and they cannot afford to pay such scholarships to everyone. Raj has already made up his mind. He has a hunch that if he doesn't keep this child by all means, he risks never knowing what kind of genius he missed. Already on the plane, Seraphim told Liana about how the face of the representative of the admissions committee of Taekock University turned green when he heard Raj's conditions. 2 months ago, university representatives showed up at Seraphim's home and wanted to know where he was going. The young man awkwardly admitted that his girlfriend had already chosen Anna's university, so he would also be applying there. Raj immediately began to make fun of his rival, who after these words was ready to offer the young man anything, just so that he would change his mind. But there was nothing to be done. The representative of Taekock University had to pack his suitcase and leave, saying that he had not lost to Raj, but that he had just been unlucky this time. Mother Seraphima continued to be in a state of shock. She could not believe that her son had just been invited to study at one of the best universities in the country. But in the end, the main character was happy that he and Liana entered Anna's university together. The girl confessed to him that she could not believe that they had achieved their goal together. She thought to herself, although she always believed in Seraphim, his grades were not so good before. Sometimes she even begins to think that he has become a completely different person. At this time, lunch finally began to be distributed throughout the plane, which the young man was very happy about, as he was quite hungry. Liana, seeing how her betrothed was gobbling up another bun, laughed loudly. Seraphim wanted to know why she laughed, but the girl said that there was nothing wrong with it. He was just the same and hadn't changed a bit. Suddenly, the young people also heard laughter coming from the next row. Liana turned to see who was laughing too and saw a pretty blonde winking at her. Mrs. Solis didn't understand why the girl looked as if she knew them. Seraphim noticed Liana's worried look and decided to find out what happened. Liana told him to look at the girl next to them because she was so beautiful. Even Mrs. Solis herself was amazed by it. Moreover, Liana noticed that the young lady was looking at Seraphim and smiling. The young man thinks that this is all nonsense, and perhaps she just laughed at the way he ate. Finally, the plane arrived in Kyoto, and the chairman of the admissions committee had already arrived there to meet the students. Raj greets the guys, and then Liana and Seraphim, greeting the chairman, notice that they are not alone. The same girl from the plane was next to them, and she also greeted Raj. The young men were surprised to realize that this girl might study with them. The chairman states that it is a great honor for Anna University that 3 of the best students in the province are admitted to them at once. Seraphim analyzes the situation. If the 3 best students were admitted, the first is him, the third is Liana. This means that the stranger is the second student to score the highest on the entrance exam. The girl happily says that she is glad to finally meet them. She heard about the guys, and today she finally saw them for the first time. The stranger finally introduced herself. Her name is Taylor Locke. He and Seraphim shake hands and promise that they will learn from each other. The young man doesn't understand why he has this feeling inside that this girl is up to something bad. The chairman decides that since everyone has already met, they can go to the university and takes the guys to the car. Having seen this car, Seraphim was simply delighted. It seems to him that Anna University's approach to its students is even better than he expected. Suddenly, he heard Taylor's laughter behind him. She said that every year the best students enter Anna University, but for the first time in history, a senior managed to get the highest score. The girl assumes that perhaps she was destined from above to meet such a genius as Seraphim. The chairman hurries them, saying that he himself will help them with the luggage, and in the meantime, they can settle into the car. He reminds them that they will have to fill out a lot of paperwork before registering. Raj, loading the suitcases into the car, thinks that they don't usually make such a fuss over the top graduates. But Seraphim is a different matter. He's simply a genius of mathematics. Since he was able to solve the top 5 most difficult hypotheses, only such a brilliant student is worthy of being greeted with all honors by Anna's University. The young man thinks that it's cool that they will be given a ride by car and that they don't have to get there themselves like the other freshmen do. Liana decides to ask Taylor how many points she scored on her entrance exams. Hearing the answer, at 736, Liana was genuinely surprised and considers it an annoyance. Taylor chuckles and says that there is nothing wrong with that. If there is a 10-point difference between her and Seraphim, she is still not his equal. Seraphim laughs, because between her and Liana, the difference is 4 points. The chairman wants to know what profile the best graduate decided to choose. Students usually make their decisions before applying, but Anna University made an exception for him. Seraphim replies that he thought about it and decided to go to the Faculty of Foreign Languages with Liana. Raj almost slammed on the brakes in shock. Did the young man really not want to enroll in the mathematics department? But he calms down and says that if he doesn't have any particular preferences, then of course any direction will do, but he still advises him to use his strengths. Seraphim doesn't care about anything. He can choose anything because he has a system. The young man notes that most likely the chairman saw his calculations, and that is why he so strongly wants him to enter the mathematics department. Seraphim doesn't want to seem cocky, but does Raj really think his math teachers still have something to teach him? These words made the chairman think, because the young man himself solved those most difficult problems. Even none of the current professors could do this. But he doesn't give up and tells the student that they can still provide him with a good base. Seraphim replies that even if he chooses the mathematics department, he thinks that the bachelor's course will be a waste of time for him, and the other students might be unhappy with his presence. But still, the hero decided that he would study English, and if he suddenly had problem-solving problems, he hoped that the math teachers would be able to help him. Raj laughs and replies that let it be as Seraphim wants, because all roads will be open to him. Finally, they reach the right place. Getting out of the car, they saw a luxurious student campus. The chairman announces to them that while the students are moving into the dormitory, he will register them. Liana and Taylor head to the girls' dorm. Mrs. Solis says goodbye to her boyfriend, offering to meet up and have lunch together afterwards. The young man, of course, agrees. Seraphim can't believe that the university life he's been waiting for so long has finally begun. Entering the dorm room, number 400, the three heroes saw their new neighbors. He was noticed and greeted by a thin, friendly boy named Daniel Pham and a funny, chubby boy named Tyler Dench. And the last one to greet him was a nice young man who said that he was just in time because there was only one free seat left. Seraphim introduces himself to them and shakes everyone's hands as a greeting. The last neighbor introduces himself as Philip Prince and says that they were just deciding who would be the boss in the room. Daniel immediately decided to speak out that he believed that the one who was older should be in charge. Tyler thinks that this is too easy and that they might be better off doing it differently. He wants to propose choosing a boss based on the number of points scored on the exam. Daniel didn't particularly like his proposal, so there was a nervous tension in the room. Tyler is simply confident that his neighbors couldn't do better than him, and he decides to be the first to say that he scored 707 points. Daniel laughed in his neighbor's face as his score was 708 points. Philip decides to interrupt his neighbors and announce that he scored 716 points. The guys already had time to think that the winner was in front of them. The neighbors finally decide to find out how many points their last tenant who moved in had. Seraphim turned around and casually said that he had received 750 points on his entrance exams. But he immediately warns that he doesn't care who will be in charge. Tyler doesn't believe the boy's words and asks him to tell the truth about the points. But Seraphim again replies that he is not lying. If they do not believe, they can check it on the internet. The results are in the public domain. Daniel whispers to the other neighbors that what their neighbor is saying is simply impossible. All three boys crowded around the phone to make sure that Seraphim's words were true. And to their surprise, they found that the young man had told them the truth. They can't believe that they've been given a genius to live with, and Tyler immediately decided to return to the concept of choosing the leader by age. Suddenly, Seraphim received a notification on his phone. It was Liana. He saw her from the window and shouted for her to wait until he came down. The roommates also wanted to see who had come to visit their genius. The boys, upon seeing Liana, immediately began calling her a cutie and assumed that she was probably the first beauty of the school. Tyler wanted to know what kind of relationship Seraphim and Liana had. The protagonist proudly declares that this is his girlfriend, and he invites the guys if they want to go and have dinner with them. Philip also cannot believe that these young people are dating, so he decides to clarify this once again. Having heard once again confirmation that Liana is his neighbor's girlfriend, Philip declares Seraphim the head of their room. The other guys also agree with this. They have even already announced that they are now a family and there should be no secrets between them. The main character feels awkward. He does not understand what secrets are being discussed. It turns out his neighbors want to know secret ways to get girls from him. Seraphim suggests that they first go down and have dinner together. Once outside, the guys see that Liana has brought with her several more attractive girls. Daniel immediately wants to use all his fluids to attract the lady, but his attention is drawn to Tyler, introducing himself with excitement. He blushed very deeply. Taylor didn't even really pay attention to them and immediately turned to Seraphim with the question of when they would go eat. The young people were very upset that their efforts went unnoticed. Philip's heart was not at all concerned about Taylor. The object that interested him was located a little behind, and he immediately decided to act. He greets the girl, introduces himself, and says that he came here from the capital. Liana, looking at this picture, decided to tell Seraphim that he seemed to have interesting neighbors. The young man feels awkward about this and suggests that they quickly find a place where they can have a bite to eat. They ended up at a cafe that served fairly hot appetizers and soups. Seraphim immediately considered them perverts because of this, because they chose a place where hot food is served. They probably wanted to look at the girls whose cheeks blushed from the heat and whose breathing quickened. But Seraphim is distracted from these thoughts by Liana, who hands her beloved a piece of meat. At the table, Philip decides to tell them that their school year will begin with military training. He even heard that the instructors would be especially strict this year, so they needed to be more careful. The girls were immediately frightened by such news. Because they are afraid of military training, their delicate skin will definitely get tanned in the sun. Philip explains that this is precisely why they need to prepare for this. They and the guys have a set of special training exercises that they would be happy to share with them. The girls are happy and decide to ask Liana if she should add them to the general chat. But the girl, to everyone's surprise, replies that this shouldn't be done. Seraphim supports her words and asks her not to add him to this chat either. The guys want to know right away why, and the young man admits that he and the girl are not obliged to attend these classes. The rest are shocked and cannot believe that these students are exempt from military training. Philip replies that he himself is from the capital, but has not heard of anyone being given preferential treatment at Anna's university, even to the children of influential parents. Seraphim replies that maybe that is true, but they lost because of their high scores. The guys didn't even think that points could play such a big role. The girls recall hearing from the news about a student who scored the highest marks on an exam, but one of them still decides to clarify that perhaps they meant the score for one subject, and not for the entrance exams as a whole. But Seraphim's neighbors confirm that he received the highest score in all subjects, and they can even check this on the internet. And Philip at this time became sad, because he understands that now, no matter what the situation, against the background of his genius neighbor, he will always look like a secondary character. Already in the evening, the guys are talking in the room, and Daniel says that he can't believe that there are so many beautiful girls in their class. Tyler asks Seraphim to let Liana introduce him better to the girl in their company today. Daniel pushes his friend away and asks Liana to help him and introduce him to the girl he likes. Seraphim decides to bring them back to reality a little, because they have known the girls for less than a day. How do they even imagine this? Philip suggests creating a joint chat and simply adding girls there. The protagonist is surprised, because it seems like they should have a class chat, and he thinks that they will deal with it tomorrow in class. Philip convinces him that this is not what they need. Their chat will only be them and the girls. Seraphim chuckles, because now he understands what they are getting at, and he decides to clarify all the details with Liana. Eventually, a chat is created and the young people begin to correspond about everything, sharing their impressions of the first day. Philip even began to think that the girl he liked him. Seraphim is trying to fall asleep and simply nods along with his comrade so that everyone falls asleep faster. Even though the neighbors agree with the main thing in the room, they decide to chat with the girls a little more. The next day, at the beginning of classes, all the eyes of the male part of the group were riveted on Liana. The young men had already begun to argue about who would approach her first. At this time, Seraphim enters the classroom and noticing the young man, the girl immediately greets him and calls him over to her. This causes indignation among the guys. They don't understand why the hell this goddess is with some stranger. Tyler, hearing this, warns them, saying that this girl is already taken. The guys can't believe it. They're already crying and saying that now they won't be able to love again. Suddenly, Taylor walked into the classroom looking casual. And then all the guys' attention immediately switched to her. They immediately tried to get her to sit at the desk with one of them. But ironically, the girl sat down next to Seraphim, which surprised the young man a little. The students again didn't like the fact that another beauty sat with this, in their opinion, loser. Seraphim wants to know why the girl sat next to him, because there are plenty of empty seats in the class. Taylor wonders why she can't sit right here. Mr. Clive wonders if she can feel those murderous looks directed at him. The girl admits that seriously, she just wanted to ask him for one favor. Taylor admits that she does not want to undergo military training and wants Seraphim to ask the chairman to excuse her from it. She asks the young man to promise her that he can get her out of military training, and in that case, she will transfer. But Seraphim wants to know why she doesn't ask Chairman Raj about it herself. But the girl doesn't seem to hear him and simply says happily that she's counting on Mr. Clive. These words and the structure of the eyes did not please Liana. She looked at the girl with a simply murderous look. But she didn't have time to say anything to her opponent, as Taylor had already stood up and gone to another desk. The boys in the class couldn't be happier, because they realized that they once again had the opportunity to meet a beauty and even sit at the same desk with her. Tyler almost cried because he managed to believe that his neighbor was dating two girls at once. The teacher finally entered the classroom and greeted all the students. Now the attention of the male half of the class switched to the teacher. The teacher greeted them again and introduced herself as Faya Crisp, and she would be teaching them a foreign language. She stated that she wanted the students to get to know each other better and get used to the new stop a little. The teacher wants everyone to introduce themselves and tell a little about themselves. One of the students is completely confident that he has the best passing score among the applicants. His choice of this faculty was influenced by the fact that there are many girls here, and he can easily find one for himself here. The young man stands up solemnly and introduces himself as Mike Vogue. He is the fourth in the ranking among those who pass the entrance exams in the province. He declares that if anyone has any difficulties in their studies, they can safely contact him. He goes on to talk about how he still has an interest in playing basketball, and he also has an interest in music, so he would like to join a music club. At first, there was silence in the class, as everyone simply thought that the young man had come there to brag. But then one by one, the students also began to stand up and introduce themselves. Mike didn't like that his classmates didn't admire him, but he understands that they are just jealous of him. He doesn't care because he already found a target that he wanted to conquer. It turned out to be Taylor. The girl stands up and greets the class, saying how nice it is to meet everyone. Since the girl immediately sat down after this phrase, the teacher decided to continue for her, saying that Taylor had an impressive passing score, thanks to which she occupied the second place among applicants. Her classmates liked this, because it turns out that the girl is not at all arrogant or boastful, not like some who only took fourth place and immediately went into hiding. Finally, it was Liana's turn. The girl also simply greeted everyone and sat down in her seat. Here the teacher also had to intervene, saying that this girl had an excellent result. She took third place this year in the entrance exams. The young men were delighted again. They clearly like beautiful and modest girls. And now it's Seraphim's turn. He introduces himself and says that most likely he gave up all his luck for this moment. He even mentions his hobby, which is basketball, and generally says that he is glad to meet you. The teacher is already deciding, and does not miss the opportunity to say that Seraphim became the first among the applicants in terms of entrance exam scores. He is also the first person in the history of the exam to receive a perfect score, so she would like to nominate Seraphim for the position of their group leader. Mike couldn't hold back and started freaking out. He's furious because he doesn't understand why such a person didn't go somewhere to study information technology or finance. At the same time, Chairman Raj was talking to his colleagues. They were just discussing a student who easily solved complex mathematical problems and at the same time chose the faculty of foreign languages. After class, Liana and Seraphim decided to go for a walk. The girl congratulated him on his post as headman. But the young man is afraid that this is not his thing because he has never had experience in such a matter. Liana laughs and infects him with her laughter. She says that there is nowhere else to go, and the young man promises to try. In fact, Seraphim wants to know what his girlfriend thinks about Taylor, how Liana would act in his place. Liana admits that at first Taylor seemed nice to her, but then she began to behave very strangely. The young man notices that his girlfriend clearly dislikes her and immediately suggests refusing to help their friend. But Mrs. Solis decides that since they are all from the same province, they should help each other. Seraphim accepts her offer and decides to go to the chairman. Liana throws herself into the guy's arms, telling him how kind he is. Noticing the teachers in the distance, Seraphim suddenly heard an interesting conversation. One of the teachers was arguing heatedly with others about the fact that Wood's conjecture was one of the 5 most difficult mathematical problems in the world. Raj objected. He understood that the teacher took everything concerning his subject seriously, and that was why this fact made him so wary. But it also called his professionalism into question. The professor simply does not understand why such a gifted boy did not choose the mathematics department. Maybe he simply does not want others to know about his abilities. The chairman claims that he could not force the student to choose something he did not like. The teacher is already losing his composure and shouts that perhaps Raj has conspired with the genius, and he hopes that the chairman is fully aware of how this could affect the prestige of their university. Raj asks Mr. Carlos to watch his speech in the presence of Mr. Shelby, and as for Seraphim, the head replies that a student like him, on the contrary, only increases the authority of their university. The chairman notices Seraphim standing at a distance. The young man awkwardly greets them and says that he was looking for Raj to talk about combat training and asks for a moment of his attention. But the angry teacher asks not to distract them and to immediately tell them why he came here. Seraphim admits that he wants one more person to be freed from these activities. Mr. Carlos does not hold back and once again starts shouting, scolds the young man for having the conscience to ask for such favors. The chairman picks up the boy and asks him to come to him later. And only now did it dawn on Carlos that this was the very student they had been arguing about. He snatches the young man from Raj's hands and, leading him along, menacingly declares that today he will find out what this mathematical genius is really capable of. The chairman was not pleased with this circumstance because Professor Carlos is known for his stubbornness. Now he will not give Seraphim a break. Raj turns to Mr. Shelby as they must ensure that everything goes well. But his colleague objects that if this boy is really as good as they say, then there is no need to be afraid of being tested. Moreover, Seraphim's scores at the entrance exams confirm this. He calls the chairman over to him, saying that they still have many important things to do. Raj begins to get a little worried. He mentally asks the young man to try not to anger Mr. Carlos even more. Meanwhile, the teacher has already brought the student to his office. He asks Seraphim to sit in the chair and explain the Wood hypothesis to him. The main character doesn't understand what's wrong with this old man and whether it's possible to be more respectful with the student. Finally, the teacher handed him a piece of paper for the solution, and at that moment, Seraphim began to examine the office in more detail. He suggests that Carlos is most likely a famous scientist who has dedicated his entire life to science and work for the good of the country. Well, be that as it may, now Mr. Clive decides to show him everything he is capable of. After some time, the professor began to check the assignment and could not believe his eyes. A moment later, the chairman, who was walking down the corridor with Mr. Shelby, decided to knock on Carlos's office door to check on how things were going. Entering the office, they could not believe their eyes. The once formidable professor was smiling sweetly and talking with Seraphim. They heard him offer the boy to become his apprentice. It turns out that Carlos may not only be a cold iceberg. The professor decided to share with Jack Steels the news that he had a student who showed great promise. At such a young age, he has already solved 5 of the world's most difficult problems, and Carlos considers himself very lucky to have agreed to study with him. He even believes that such a wonderful student needs a careful approach. Jack didn't particularly like listening to this old man talk only about Seraphim for half an hour. The young man is also Carlos's student, and right now his nerves were giving way. He could no longer complete his work calmly in such an environment. But he still decides to ask the professor if it is possible to solve 5 difficult problems so easily and quickly. The young man believes that it is worth making sure that their solution is correct, just in case. Carlos notes that Jack even made him doubt. Some of the evidence he brought actually seemed a little inaccurate to him. And perhaps he will go to the lab and use the main computer to check some data. Jack volunteers to try it himself. Carlos, of course, agrees, because Miss Hazel works in the lab, with whom his student is in love. He allows Jack to make calculations on his behalf, but the young man must wait for the professor to write a letter, and he also asks him to keep everything said now between them. If there really are inaccuracies in Seraphim's arguments, then this situation could have a negative impact on his reputation. He may be criticized in the future, so he must take care to ensure that no problems arise. Jack can't stop being angry. He doesn't understand why the professor keeps talking about Seraphim. The young man thinks that whoever it is does not deserve an ounce of his respect, and he will not let anyone stand in his way. Walking into the computer lab, Jack greets Miss Hazel. The students who are there also note that Miss Hazel Grace is the most talented girl at Anna University. She is in her early 20s, and she already has great fame at the international level. They're just wondering what kind of guy came and keeps hanging around her. Jack introduces himself to Miss Hazel and says that he is here on behalf of Professor Carlos. He wants to use the main computer. After looking at the papers, the girl was surprised to see information about Wood's hypothesis. Perhaps the professor managed to prove it, but after looking at the papers more closely, she realized that this theory was proven by Seraphim Clive. Jack didn't like that she mentioned his rival's name out loud. Hazel chuckles and replies that she never thought that Professor Carlos, who avoided email, claiming that it was too much of a hassle to figure out how it worked, would ever decide to take his student's advancement seriously. The student also laughs and replies that, as far as he knows, there are still some doubts about Seraphim. It is said that he deliberately chose the faculty of foreign languages instead of mathematics, because he falsified the results of the exams out of fear that his deception would be exposed. Jack laughs and states that he personally does not suspect him in any way. All this is more likely just rumors, and in fact, Seraphim is smart and talented. Hazel was very unhappy with this suggestion. This was the first time Professor Carlos's student had been revealed to be a fraud, and she thought that this letter was clearly unlikely to be genuine. Jack is jubilant. He managed to outwit the girl and not allow Seraphim to get around him. He will be able to hope for a draw. Moreover, Jack will not allow him to take even the second place. He even wants to tell the international math group about his opponent's cheating. Jack believes that Seraphim will suffer such shame that he never dreamed of. At the same time, a general cleaning is taking place in the men's dormitory. Tyler and Daniel had a falling out while cleaning up, and Seraphim noticed and ordered them to stop, because the sooner they finished cleaning up, the sooner they could go to dinner. Philip supports the head of the room and also tells the guys to do everything as the elder said. His roommates turned to look at him and began to glare at him, which sent shivers down Philip's spine. Daniel and Tyler suddenly started pointing at him and yelling at Seraphim that Philip had just laughed at him. The young man wants to know why they are pointing the finger at him, since he didn't mean anything like that. Seraphim decided to ask the guys why they had been acting strangely since he returned to the dorm. Philip assumes that they are trying to please Seraphim in order to get closer to Taylor. The guys immediately started denying that it was all nonsense and that they simply respected their boss. Philip notes that, one way or another, there are those who are not happy that it was Mr. Clive who took the post of group leader, and now they must be throwing mud at Seraphim behind his back. Mr. Prince is even interested to hear what his neighbor thinks about this. But the main character doesn't care. He thinks that they should think what they want. The guys are shocked that the young man is not upset by this, because the criminals can ruin his reputation. Seraphim thinks that let it be so, their words mean nothing to him. He will just try to be a good headman, because isn't that the most important thing? Philip believes that this is probably how the thinking of a strong person works, and this is what his boss convinced him of. Daniel and Tyler think their boss is cool, and I don't think any evil intentions will work against him. Suddenly, Seraphim received a message from Taylor, reminding him of her request to be excused from military training. Here, Mr. Clive's nerves gave way. This girl seemed to be mocking him. At the same time, Hazel finished the check and asked the lab assistant to tell Professor Carlos that the check calculations were completed. The young man decided to ask what kind of calculations they were. The girl admits that these are calculations that prove Wood's hypothesis, and they are correct. The lab assistant is shocked by what his colleague just said, because isn't Wood's hypothesis one of the most difficult problems in the world? Miss Grace became angry and said that if she were him, she would not have kept the professor waiting. While the lab assistant ran away, she thought that whoever the guy was who managed to solve this serious hypothesis, she couldn't believe that with such talent, he didn't even try to apply to the physics and mathematics department. But if what Jack said is true, then he acted dishonestly, falsified the exam results. 6 hours later, Professor Carlos called Seraphim to come with him. He wants to show his student the most advanced computer in all of China so that in the future he can use it to check his calculations. But that's only one of the reasons they're here. The second is that he wants to introduce him to a young genius at their university. Entering the office, they were already greeted by a joyful Miss Hazel. Seeing the young man next to Carlos, she asked who it was. Seraphim introduced himself to her and said that he had heard a lot about how the professor had described Miss Grace's brilliant mind. But Hazel's reaction was only cold. She stated that he hadn't even had time to enroll yet and was already trying to gain everyone's trust. Ignoring the shocked faces of the men, the girl handed the professor the calculations for Wood's hypothesis and said that they gave her a couple of thoughts. Carlos doesn't understand what's going on because Hazel has never behaved so rudely before, but he pushes these thoughts away and carefully looks over the calculations. And suddenly he joyfully shows these sheets to Seraphim, telling him to look. Hazel begins to get even more angry, as she does not understand why the professor is showing the boy these papers. Seraphim persistently tries to understand why the girl is so angry with him, but suddenly his thoughts switch to something else. He received a new task from the system. The young man thought, because Professor Carlos respects Miss Hazel very much, so he needs to establish a relationship with her. But first, he needs to put her in her place a little. And then, out of the blue, he points his finger at the calculations and tells the professor that there is an incorrect equation. The girl becomes wildly enraged and is ready to attack the student with her fists. But Carlos stops her and tells her that there really is a mistake. He asks her to look more closely at the third line of the calculations. Seraphim reports that he fears that the overall concept presented by Miss Grace is not fully thought out, and that it would be better to choose a different direction. The sun had already begun to set behind the horizon when the professor shouted, "Bravo!" And Hazel was amazed, because she did not expect such good suggestions from Seraphim. The young man laughs and admits that he was simply struck by inspiration. Miss Grace bows her head before him and asks for forgiveness, because there was a misunderstanding between them, and she should not have doubted him. However, she has one question. Why does he allow such talent to go to waste at the Foreign Language Institute? And she suggests that he transfer to the physics and mathematics department, because he doesn't want his school years to be wasted. But before answering, Seraphim wants to know what university is for a girl like her. Hazel replies that for her, university is one of the stages of the educational system. Mr. Clive believes that the essence of a university is not in one thing, but in several components, such as professors, laboratories, and others. He wants to say that the choice of faculty is not the endpoint of his education. He can study any subjects he wants. Otherwise, there would be no such thing as an interdisciplinary subject. But Miss Grace thinks the first thing he needs to do is have a clear idea of what he wants to do. Seraphim admits that he entered the Faculty of Foreign Languages only because he wanted to be close to someone dear to him. Yes, they are students, and it is important for them to get a good education. But first and foremost, they are people who have feelings. After all, if it weren't for his family and friends, he wouldn't have been able to advance so far. It was thanks to Liana that he began to work hard and achieved what he has in terms of education. Carlos also decided to calm Hazel down, saying that of course he couldn't say that he agreed with everything Seraphim said, but he reminded him of what he had wanted to tell her for a long time. After all, for the last 6 months she has practically been living in the laboratory, and she hasn't been home or called her parents for a long time. Sometimes too much mental workload can be detrimental to the flow of thought. Taking breaks will help her mind become more flexible. The girl noticeably cheered up and said that she never thought that Seraphim could teach her anything. Sitting already in the dorm room, the young man receives a notification from the system, stating that he has completed his mission, and now he is interested in what reward awaits him this time. His reward was called Fire Eyes. Seraphim became very curious about what this skill meant. At the same time, Jack was walking around the laboratory and he overheard how the students were discussing that one of the new students had proven a complex hypothesis. He was tense at this news, but all his thoughts disappeared when he saw Miss Grace on his way. He immediately noted that he didn't often see her outside the laboratory. The girl admits that she decided to follow the advice of Professor Carlos and Seraphim to see how rest would affect the flexibility of the mind. The young man does not understand what happened and why Miss Grace is behaving so strangely. He decides to find out if she has already met Seraphim Clive, because he warned her that he cannot be trusted. Jack is afraid that he got into university by deception, and who knows what else he might do. Hazel's expression suddenly changed, and she asked Jack not to talk about Seraphim like that, because he turned out to be a great boy. She apologizes and says that she wants to continue walking. Seeing the object of his desires move away, Jack begins to get angry. He wanted to be gentle with Seraphim after all. They study at the same university, but now he left him no choice. At the same time, Mr. Clive decided to try out his new ability and placed 2 cards face down on the table in front of him. To his surprise, looking at them, he was able to see what kind of card it was, its value and suit. It turns out to be Fiery Eyes. This is X-ray vision. He asks his roommate to help him and tells him to sit next to him. Seraphim wants Tyler to turn his back on him and shuffle the cards. Tyler doesn't understand what they want from him and wonders if his neighbor is practicing some kind of magic trick. But he still does everything as he was told and shows Seraphim the cards. After looking closely, the young man answers that the 2 of diamonds is on the left and the 3 of clubs is on the right. Tyler thinks this is incredible and wants to know how his neighbor did it. The young man tries to understand whether Seraphim simply made marks on the maps. The main character already realizes that this ability can be a good help to him. In the midst of learning his new ability, he receives a call from Professor Carlos. When he picked up the phone, a cry came from there, which said that Seraphim should come to the professor quickly because he had urgent business with him. An anonymous person accused him of academic fraud, and now an international delegation is coming to them to clarify the circumstances. Carlos warns that the members of this delegation are very serious and don't care whether he was able to prove Wood's hypothesis or not. For some reason, they are sure that Seraphim passed off other people's records as his own. It's not hard to understand that Jack started all this. He wants the young man to embarrass himself in front of all the members of the Chinese Mathematical Society tomorrow. Scientists all over the world can be divided into 4 classes. The first class of scientists are those whose achievements are limited to mastering a certain set of knowledge. The most they can achieve is to receive a few patents for inventions. But there are those who believe that such people do not deserve an academic degree. Second-class scientists make revolutionary discoveries and try to find explanations for controversial phenomena. Their scientific articles are published in prestigious journals. Third-class scientists are one step away from reaching the frontier of human knowledge, and their skills are sufficient to organize a whole set of theories and ideas and then pass them on to the younger generation. Scientists of the fourth class are able to introduce to humanity a new field that goes far beyond the limits of knowledge, which is necessarily recognized by all other scientists on Earth. Today, there are no more than 100 fourth-class scientists in total. Finally, the international delegation arrived in the main conference hall. Mr. Shelby whispers to Miss Hazel that someone reported that China had proven Wood's hypothesis. The girl is indignant because it was done on purpose, and the person who sent the anonymous statement is one of the few trusted people with whom they shared the secret. She realizes that not many people knew about the proof of the hypothesis, and she seems to have an idea who it could have been. The delegation is talking to each other. One of the members is named Tom. He is a second-class scientist from the kingdom of Starbust. A third-class scientist named Mott from the Sakura Kingdom is talking to him. Mott begins to tell that he himself recently completed his latest work concerning one hypothesis. One of the professors screamed when she heard this. She wanted to clarify whether Motu had managed to prove the second most difficult hypothesis of the world. The scientist laughs and hands everyone sheets of paper with his findings so that they can look at them. Tom finds his colleague's progress encouraging and says he thinks he will need a week to complete the hypothesis. Mott claps his hands to get everyone's attention and announces that he has a great idea on how to make their meeting even more effective. How everyone present is watching that boy named Seraphim Clive. Look at his notes and try to bring them to a logical conclusion within 2 hours. Hazel enters into a polemic. She does not understand what this madman is talking about, because this is a completely different hypothesis that requires a different solution. But Mott calmly states that if the young man fails, he will call into question the reputation of the entire university. Suddenly, Seraphim enthusiastically declares that he is ready to try. Hazel was surprised that after all this, he was still willing to try. Because the complexity of the XE hypothesis reaches world level, it is impossible to solve it in an hour. Seraphim understands that the old man from Sakura wants to ruin the image of the Chinese academic community, and he simply has to stop him. Mott greets the young man and asks if he is ready to speak on behalf of the entire academic community of China. Professor Carlos is a fourth-class scientist, and he shouts at his protege to do everything for the honor of their country. The boy looks at the sheets of paper and uses his skill called brainstorming. Meanwhile, Mott decides to ask Miss Grace if she would like to transfer to Sakura University. After all, there are less than 2 hours left before the reputation of Anna University is destroyed. Their status will be called into question, and it will be difficult to find a new job abroad. Hazel was about to say a few kind words to this scientist, but Seraphim stopped her. He said that they had nothing to worry about. They won't cause them any problems because the young man has already found a solution to the XE hypothesis. The teachers are perplexed because only a few minutes have passed, during which time the student usually does not even have time to solve an algebra problem. Seraphim cheerfully declares that nevertheless, it took him only a couple of minutes to figure out this clumsy decision. None of the delegation can believe his words, and all this begins to anger them. Throwing the papers on the table, Seraphim declares that he has an idea on how to simplify the proof of this hypothesis. He decided to deviate from the method presented by Mr. Mott. He asks everyone present to pay attention to the board. Mott cannot tolerate such impudence. Slapping his palm on the table, he says that he will look at the shame of this young man. Mr. Clive continues. Firstly, he shows a new formula. Then he paints almost the entire board and explains everything at the same time, showing what result he managed to achieve. His solution turned out to be much easier and more effective. During his explanation, Mott broke out in a cold sweat. He simply did not believe everything that was happening around him. This simply cannot be. Could it be that at such a young age, Seraphim has already reached the level of a fourth-grade scientist? Professor Carlos even began to clap his hands, declaring that they, scientists, do not create a stir around their ideas, but calmly move towards the goal. The formula for calculating the sum of numbers was created by Gauss at the age of 10, and at 24 he proved the theorem of the regular heptagon. By this, he means that true geniuses begin to show their potential in their youth. Seraphim decides to approach Mr. Motu and asked him to remind him what he was talking about. But he did not let him speak, but repeated that Mott was sure that in 2 hours the reputation of the Chinese academic society would be ruined at the root. Seraphim is afraid that the scientist was mistaken and that here and now it is not China that awaits humiliation, but Sakura. Professor Carlos intervenes in the conversation. He is, of course, on the side of his protege, but decides to remind him that he is still just a student. And Professor Mott is above him in status, so he must respect what he does and says. The scientist understands that he was humiliated in front of the members of the international delegation. He thinks that everyone will laugh at him now. They had already started talking behind his back, discussing how they didn't think anyone could prove the XE hypothesis in such a short time. Tom believes that this is a turning point for the entire world of mathematics, and his colleague supports him and believes that it is necessary to tell others about it as soon as possible. Mott stands aside and thinks that he is a loser, and now he will never regain his former respect, because a new star has appeared that has eclipsed him with its radiance. The next day, Jack was walking around campus and again heard about a certain gifted genius at their university. He couldn't believe that Seraphim turned out to be so smart, and the young man didn't know what to do now. So he went to the laboratory to Miss Grace, who called him to her. But when he opened the door, he discovered that the girl was not alone, but in the company of Seraphim. When Jack timidly asked what they were doing there, Hazel became angry and stated that she had asked Professor Carlos to give them time to talk alone. The girl suspected that it was Jack who sent the anonymous statement. The young man pretended not to understand what she was talking about, but Miss Grace continued. She reported that the members of the commission confirmed that the calculations of the Wood hypothesis were correct, but someone convinced them that Seraphim had passed off someone else's work as his own. And they came to their university and demanded proof. And besides her, Seraphim and Professor Carlos, only Jack knew about it and had to keep everything a secret. The girl threw a stack of papers at the traitor, screaming that his stupid behavior was not worthy of a graduate of one of China's most prestigious universities. Hazel asks him how he could give in to envy so easily. Jack begins to shake with fear and stutters as he tries to apologize, saying that his mind was clouded. Miss Grace screams at him to apologize not to her, but to Seraphim. Jack gets to his feet and tries awkwardly to squeeze out an apology. Seraphim laughs because he thought that Hazel called him here for some important matter, but it turned out to be such a trifle. This really angered Jack. He asks the young man if he cares that his life could have gone downhill. Seraphim leans towards him and says that they have been working all their lives for a bright future, and this incident became an unusual obstacle on the way to it, which he overcame and is ready to move on. Already in the dorm room, Tyler, having heard this story, was surprised. Who would have thought that Mr. Clive would be set up by a senior student? He would not have been able to forgive him so easily in his place. And Daniel grabbed Seraphim and calls him cool, because he heard how he put that old man from Sakura in his place. Tyler declares that from now on their boss is a university celebrity, which means that in order to pick up a girl, he only needs to say that he shares a room with Seraphim. But the main character doesn't like their speech, so he decides to ask if they plan to drive him crazy. Daniel calms him down and explains that he is only saying all this because he truly believes it. Seraphim suggests forgetting all this, and he will treat them to dinner if only they would leave him alone because he just received the prize money. Seeing the silent question in the eyes of his neighbors, he explains that this money was sent to him for proving the Wood hypothesis, and this amount is in the form of a family or 8 noble sums. His neighbors, hearing about this, could not rejoice enough at how lucky they were to have a roommate. Seraphim decided to find out where another of their comrades, Philip, had gone. Daniel heard that he went to play basketball because today is a tryout game with the team from Taikok University. Seraphim admits that he didn't even know that Philip had already been accepted into the team. Tyler reports that it was a surprise to them too. It turns out that he is not only smart, but also good at sports. Besides, he's also a great guy from a rich family, but Tyler still thinks that their boss is 100 times cooler. Seraphim decides that it would be better for them to go and watch the game, because whether it is a trial or not, the competitive spirit has not been canceled. The fight had already flared up on the basketball court. Philip blocked the opponent's ball and, having taken it away, moved towards the opponent's hoop. His efforts were not in vain. He scored on the first try. Seeing their comrade carry out a brilliant attack, Tyler decided to shout words of encouragement at him. One of the cheerleaders heard this and, turning around angrily, asked the guys what they were doing there, since the students at Anna's university were sitting on the other side. The young men smile awkwardly and ask her forgiveness for their mistake. Suddenly, the fans took a closer look at the young man's face and recognized him as Seraphim, the genius everyone talks about, and this melted their hearts. They confessed to the main character that they are his big fans. This delight was noticed not only by Seraphim, but also by the basketball team of Anna University. The guys reacted very negatively to the fact that all the attention was not going to them. But the game continues. The opponent tries to get around Philip, who blocks him. Suddenly, he hits the young man right in the solar plexus. Seraphim noticed this and began to shout that the enemy did it on purpose. A student from Taikok University says that without physical confrontation, there is nothing to do in basketball, or he can go out on the court and show how it is done. Seraphim approached Philip to lift him up, and one of the players was already shouting that the young man was not included in the reserve team and that this was against the rules. Zadira thinks that they don't have to stick to the rules. This is a trial game, and if Seraphim isn't happy with something, then let him show them how it should be done. Philip tries to tell his friend not to pay attention to it, but Seraphim decides that if they want to see wild basketball, then they will get it. He will show them real sportsmanship. The rivals are only happy with this outcome. They don't believe that the mathematical genius will be able to beat them. Seraphim takes off his jacket and declares that he will score 100 points against his opponents. His opponents simply laugh at him, not understanding what 100 points he is talking about. But before the player had time to come to his senses, the ball was already in Seraphim's hands. The team captain yells at the other players to stop the new guy. But Seraphim already knew that his opponents would not succeed, and he literally soared into the air above them like an eagle to throw the ball. Anna's entire university rejoiced when the ball hit the basket, and her comrades shouted wishes to their boss. But the opposing team is not ready to give up. They must concentrate. But they were once again unsuccessful. The ball seemed to magnetize itself to Seraphim's hand and then hit the target. At the moment, the score is Taikok University 34 points and Anna University 39 points. The opposing captain is once again trying to motivate everyone to play more aggressively and wants them to at least just block the young man. But Seraphim quickly noticed and analyzed their new type of attack. He simply distracted his opponent and, without moving from his spot, threw the ball into the basket. The player admits to the captain that since the young man is too evasive, they cannot block him well. The opponent gets furious. He takes the ball himself and orders everyone to attack together because they need to score no matter what. But it was not to be. Seraphim knocked the ball out of his hand and, jumping up, immediately scored another point. The opponents don't even understand what number the ball was, and the captain orders them to simply avoid this scumbag from now on. But they couldn't just go around and score because Seraphim wasn't the only great player on the team. The Taikok University team failed to carry out their powerful attack again because Seraphim can hold back 3 of their players at once, and so it remains 2 against 4. The captain gives another speech about how they have no right to lose and need to move into battle. But after a few more halves, they are already lying on the court without strength. By this time, the score was already 57 points for Taikok University and 159 points for Anna University. Finally, the referee announces the score and says that the match is over, and Seraphim's comrades rejoice. Mr. Clive, despite all the honors, decided to approach the captain of the opponents and say once again that he knows that he deliberately pushed Philip. Now he will have to remember that karma works without days off. After the game, one of the Taikok University fans gently pulled Seraphim up. The young man thought that she wanted to stand up for her captain, but in fact, she wanted to ask the young man for an autograph. Other fans hurried after her with open notebooks at the ready. They even managed to quarrel over who should get the autograph first. Then another fan materialized behind him, which made him even more scared. Noticing the girl out of turn, a fight immediately broke out between the fans. Seeing the turn things were taking, Seraphim decided to get away from there as quickly as possible. Gradually, the fame of the young genius spread throughout Anna's university faster and faster, and all the locals were already trying to find his accounts on social networks. Seraphim woke up in the morning in the dorm, half asleep, went into his phone and discovered that there was an unimaginable number of subscribers on his page. Suddenly, a fairy appeared in the room and congratulated him on what he had achieved, marking 20 million fans, and that the hidden task called Famous Person had been completed. The creature noted that they had not seen each other for a long time, and she was glad to see the owner. The fairy did not expect that Seraphim would be able to complete the next task so easily. It seems she underestimated him. Thanks to this task, the young man comes to the conclusion that his fans can also perform tasks. It follows that there are missions whose success depends on the level of popularity. The system never ceases to amaze him. The fairy confirms this because communication skills also need to be learned. Like everything else, this experience is undoubtedly important in the life of every person. Seraphim already regretted asking her about it, but he wants to find out further what reward he will receive for successfully completing the mission. The fairy appeared here to give him his reward. The creature was angered by the fact that Seraphim did not consider that this task had a teaching function. Therefore, the fairy decides to leave, leaving the young man alone to deal with everything himself. Left alone, Seraphim felt a little sad, but decided that he could cope without her help. It turns out that the famous person's mission has two phases, the first of which has already been completed, and the second is in progress. Seraphim has already realized that the number of fans plays an important role. He still can't believe that they can actually complete tasks. Scrolling through the feed, the young man also comes across mentions of his name in connection with something called the Battle of Intellects. The Battle of Intellects is an international competition in which the best minds from more than 10 countries take part. China, the land of lighthouses, the land of cherry blossoms, the land of eagles, and the land of witches are competing for first place in different fields of knowledge. In the last game, the winner was a contestant from the country of Maikov, several steps ahead of his rivals. China took a less responsible approach to selecting candidates this time, but was still only a few points behind. Competitions like these don't show the true potential of an entire country, but the public doesn't think so. The country of Myax, which won first place, made fun of China, thereby angering its people, and this time China is demanding revenge. At this point, Taylor finished her explanation about this show. She explains to Seraphim that the country has high hopes for him. Everyone thinks that he will be the one to put the country of lighthouses in their place. The young man considers this another stupid show. He is already thinking that if he had known in advance that Liana had morning classes, he would not have come here. He tells Taylor that it's not worth worrying about and to just forget about it since he won't be participating. But first, the girl offers him something to look at. Seraphim picks up the tablet to watch the winner's interview, fully confident that it won't convince him otherwise. The winner says that this time they will have only one goal, to retain the title of winner. The interviewer chuckles and says that there is talk that in China there is one genius boy who is capable of competing with the country of lighthouses. The winner laughs and points out that she probably means a student who received invitations from different universities at the same time. The contestant shrugs and replies that he very much doubts that an 18-year-old boy will be a strong competitor to him. The interviewer replies that it is hard to believe, but there is information that he disgraced the mathematician of the sacrostate. The man believes that these are all Asian tricks that you shouldn't fall for because they are mired in vanity. From the side of the country of Mayakov, real students will participate in the battle of wits. China, in his opinion, expels those who have already graduated from university. He even wants to bet that their vaunted genius won't even show up on the show, thus showing his worthlessness. Once Seraphim finished watching, Taylor invited him to leave comments. There were a lot of words under the video about how China will not give up and they must definitely win. At that moment, Seraphim learned that he had been able to complete the second phase. This time, the young man will not stand aside. He declares that he will take part in the Battle of Intellects. It wasn't long before the news came that Seraphim would be taking part and fighting for the title of king in the Battle of Intellects. While Liana and Seraphim were walking in the park, they had already heard strangers talking about this topic several times. Miss Solis noted that her betrothed is quite popular. Suddenly, her smile disappears, and she admits that she is angry that he did not tell her that he would be taking part in international competitions. The young man had already managed to get seriously scared when Liana burst out laughing again and said that she was actually joking. However, she noticed that he had not only fans, but also haters. Liana tells the guy to try hard, and he declares that they will definitely get the king of the Battle of the Intellects Cup. The girl laughs again, and they decide to continue their walk. And it was a tense evening in the office of the team developing the Battle of Wits show. One of the employees burst into the boss's office and announced that they had lost their last sponsor. The boss thinks this is outrageous, because what kind of trusting relationship can we talk about when they are treated like this? The assistant wants to know what they should do now, because they have already spent too much money from the company's budget on television and radio broadcasting. The boss remembers a meeting a couple of weeks ago about investing funds and discussing where they would be spent. This becomes another headache for the boss. They have little time. He is not sure that they will be able to find a new sponsor. In addition, losing the Battle of Wits led to attacks from haters from other countries. He's afraid that few will want to join the team this time. The assistant wants to tell the boss one more piece of news, and the boss asks him not to mumble. He reports that Seraphim Clive has decided to join them in the upcoming competition. The boss doesn't quite share this joy, since he doesn't understand what use this boy is in their situation. Let's say he became one of the participants and can even make it to the international stage, but will he be able to beat all the participants from other countries and become the champion of the Battle of Wits? Of course, he has lost quite a lot of fame, but what does that give them? Their goal now is to increase ratings. The boss notes that this Seraphim is very famous, but what if he fails at the national stage? The head thinks that now they need to worry more about how to advance to the top programs and find sponsors, and it seems that they should reconsider the questions for castings. In the dormitory, roommates were already lined up to Seraphim so that he could tell them how to solve some problem. Tyler notes that Daniel is distracting their boss from reading as usual, but the young man explains that he just wants their comrade to practice explaining assignments and feel confident on the show. They are interrupted by Seraphim, who informed them that those responsible for developing the program called him and said that he did not need to go through a casting, and that he automatically gets into the first round. The boys are happy for him and think that it was the director who rated his abilities so highly. Daniel noticed that Philip had become strangely quiet and was sitting in the corner of the room, so he asked what the young man was so busy doing. Philip replies that he is busy browsing the most discussed news on the internet, and he seemed to have found out that their boss was the only one who was exempted from the casting. In addition, he reports that many anti-fans have appeared who want to put Seraphim in an awkward position. The protagonist slams the book shut and decides to repeat once again that there is no need to worry about him, because in the face of absolute talent, nothing matters. 3 days later, the king of the Battle of Intellects debate, the qualifying round, takes place. The charming host greets everyone, introduces herself as China, and declares the qualifying round open. After the first audition, only 100 candidates out of tens of thousands of applications were able to advance to this round. And today, the final round of participant selection awaits them. They prepared 100 sites for their candidates to compete with each other. Contestants will answer questions simultaneously, but only the first 10 people who give the correct answer will receive points. Then the 10 participants with the best results will become real competitors. They will later represent their countries at an international tournament. China asks once again to welcome today's candidates, and everyone starts clapping until the confetti stops falling from above. The tournament began, and the first question appeared on the board. Tyler and Philip did not understand anything. The picture looked more like some kind of mosaic. Suddenly, Tyler noticed that many of the players were looking at the screen with their heads tilted strangely. Philip recalls hearing about a similar technique called 3D Eye. With its help, you can superimpose several pictures on top of each other, and the different elements will immediately be highlighted. He realized that they were studying the screen from top to bottom vertically and from left to right horizontally, most likely combining several photographs into one large one, and then comparing them to quickly find differences. Tyler chuckles. Now it makes sense, after all. Only the first 10 people will be able to get points. And at that moment, the comrade was seized by panic. What if Seraphim doesn't know how to use the 3D Eye technique? An assistant ran into the technical room with the news. He brought the boss the hottest internet news. The headlines were already saying that the country's top genius, Seraphim Clive, couldn't even pass the qualifying round. The boss is happy because he sees that many people are interested in this. And this means only one thing. They must take advantage of this farce to attract sponsors. The leader carefully selected the questions for this round, and none of them were related to mathematics, because no matter how much of a genius this Seraphim was, he couldn't be that wasteful. China was surprised when only 10 seconds had passed and a participant named Seraphim was already ready to give his answer. But to everyone's surprise, the answer turns out to be correct, and the young man gets the first 10 points. The protagonist had no doubt that he would win this task, as the reward for the last draw was the power of inspection, and its effects were simply amazing. The young man then gave one correct answer after another, increasingly shocking the audience. The boss watched the game, and Seraphim, he did not understand how this was possible. This guy is a mathematical genius. Isn't he the one who solves universally complex problems? If the young man wants to make his city famous, he needs to focus. The man couldn't even believe that there were such versatile geniuses in the world. The assistant tries to tell the boss that things seem to be getting out of control, but the boss just yells at him to stop talking nonsense. The assistant hands the phone to the chief and asks him to look at the comments. People on the internet mocked Seraphim and thought that the show had specially rewritten the questions for him. The boss gets angry because he asked his assistant to hire professionals to stir up interest in the show and thereby attack Seraphim. In fact, the assistant found a pretty strong PR company. But what he failed to foresee was that within a couple of hours, the PR team had found quite a few subcontractors. The boss encouraged his workers to direct all their anger at a man named Seraphim Clive. The employee immediately decided to clarify what was wrong, because this guy doesn't seem so bad to him. But the boss reminds him that this same employee worked as an anti-fan for 2 years, and he should already know what he's doing. As a result, a misunderstanding occurred, which led to mockery of the program team and insults to Seraphim. The comrades continue to admire their neighbor, because he has already scored 104 points. Philip notices and wants to know if his friends think the second contender looks familiar. Now in second place is a student named Dave Romer. His results are also quite good. Philip recalls that last year he took third place in the debate tournament, and in terms of knowledge, he can easily compare with the winner. The boss is furious. He orders his assistant to immediately contact the PR company because these comments need to be removed. The boss sits down in a chair and, bowing his head, realizes how badly they screwed up. The entire budget went to renting the premises and signing a contract with a PR company. Suddenly, an assistant bursts into the room with a joyful expression on his face. The head was even a little scared by such suddenness, but the assistant doesn't listen to him and simply hands him the phone, saying that there is a person on the line and he wants to become their sponsor. The leader can't believe this is the turning point. The only condition that the client put forward was that Seraphim Clive be the face of the program. China announces that the tournament has come to an end, and now they can all congratulate the participant named Seraphim, who answered all 20 questions in a row correctly and took first place. Dave left the studio a little deflated as he only came in second place. As he walked down the corridor, he tried to contain his anger, as he was sure that the winner had simply been given the answers in advance. The next day in the lab, a student approached Tyler to ask if he was rooming with the winner of the preliminary round of the debate tournament. Another classmate overheard this conversation and decided to say that he had heard that the answers had been leaked online. Liana eavesdrops as their classmates try to figure out the secret of Seraphim's success. Suddenly, Mike Wohl sits down next to the girl and greets her. Daniel noticed that their boss's girlfriend was having problems and decided to go up to her and say that the seat next to Liana was already taken. Mike decides to ask if there is someone's name written in this place. Daniel was about to take action, but Seraphim suddenly grabbed him by the shoulder. The young man wants to know if everything is okay with his girlfriend. But Liana calmly replies that everything is fine and invites him to move to the back together. Finally, a teacher comes into their classroom and announces the start of the class. Her name is Rose, and she will now be teaching their foreign languages module. She hopes that everyone present understands their profession, although it may seem that the specialty of mathematicians and physicists is much more difficult. Languages also require deep knowledge. After graduation, they will have many opportunities to work as interpreters, translators, and diplomats. To start, Rose wants to let them translate a small passage into Chinese. Mike decides to volunteer first, as he wants to get his dose of everyone's attention. While completing assignments at the board, the young man already anticipates victory, as he is sure that Seraphim is a complete zero in languages. Rose checks the assignment and praises the student for a very good translation. But then he immediately states that this task, as far as the aesthetic side is concerned, is not ideal, so there is something to work on. She sends Mike back to his seat, and the student feels his whole body shaking with despair. Rose calls Seraphim to the board so that he can also try to translate the passage. Only now the young man came to his senses a little, and Mike had already managed to think that finally, at least others would get a little of the teacher's wrath. Seraphim asks Rose to repeat, since he heard what she said and also wants her to repeat what language they are translating into. The teacher hands him some chalk and in a stern voice orders him to go to the board first. Mike is on edge, waiting with bated breath for Seraphim's pretense to be exposed. But then suddenly the student tells Rose that he doesn't have enough space on the board to write everything down. The teacher orders him to write until there is no more space. Mike rubs his hands, realizing that Seraphim is about to receive the public disgrace he deserves. But everyone was only surprised to see how the young man translated the phrase into different languages, and the board really ran out of space. Rose stood in mute shock. She wrote this passage herself. The student not only has a complex logical structure, but also unusual content. She can't even believe that he is really able to translate the text into 20 languages so easily. The teacher understands that one glance is enough to understand that this text is of first-class quality. Seraphim has the level of a professional translator with 20 years of experience, as if he is fluent in 20 languages. The boy turns to Rose and says with a smile that there is no more space on the board, but the teacher doesn't care anymore and tells her to finish it there. Having declared the class over, she wondered if an 18-year-old student could be fluent in more than 20 languages, and Rose wanted to talk to the dean about it. Seraphim sits down next to Liana and asks if she has seen how good he is. The girl praises him, but at the same time wants to know when her boyfriend started to stand out so much. Of course, Seraphim can't tell her that everything he has now is thanks to the educational system. 8 hours ago, a fairy visited him and said that his performance in the rematch helped him advance in his mission. He asks the creature to show him the panel, and the fairy does so. A screen appears in front of him. The young man sees that nothing has changed in the table except Fauna's points. He became curious as to why this indicator was always at 0. The fairy explains that Fauna's points are equal to achievement points. Since Seraphim has not reached a certain level, the point system is locked. The young man doesn't understand how he could not reach a certain level if he has 13 million subscribers. The creature replies, somewhat mockingly, that he needs 20 million for this. The hero then decides to lie on the bed and think about where to get so many fans. Maybe he needs to achieve a higher status. Seraphim comes to the director and asks to open a sick leave for him. The director had already assumed that their genius would participate in the battle of wits, so he was not against it and wanted to know how long the young man would be gone. Seraphim replies that the team warned him and 2 weeks will be enough. The director notes that this show has become very important lately, and their student must try hard and not disgrace Anna's university. The main character asks him not to worry, because if he participates in this tournament, he will definitely win. Meanwhile, in the office of the TV station director, the head is considering the candidates, Seraphim and Dave. He knows that they are first-class mathematicians and talented young people. The show's director confirms this information, but Dave is known to be more interested in promoting himself on social networks. He took 3rd place in the last tournament, but many believe he was simply unlucky. The head coach admits that he initially wanted Dave to lead the team in the international tournament, but in the end, they chose Seraphim. The director praises his subordinates for their good work. But the director, sitting down in his chair, notes that he has noticed that the internet is not calm right now. The head supports his boss and responds that people nowadays send spam to everyone. People will always find something to argue about, especially when it comes to fans of various TV projects. They can't live without insulting someone. The director tells the head of the program to keep a close eye on this and always be aware. And the most important thing to remember is that they have an entertainment show. They need to make sure that the opinion of the viewers is in their favor. The director also promised the employee that if he tried hard, a great future awaited him. And finally, all the participants and the head of the TV channel gathered for a general meeting. The director announces that for the sake of the popularity of their show, they have decided that each participant will choose an individual challenge for themselves and immediately warns that repeats are prohibited. One of the participants was unhappy with this task and thought it was unfair. The head also stated that they invited Professor Carlos from the University of Science and Technology. He will judge them and give a fair assessment. While everyone started whispering about the professor, the director immediately decided to confirm that this is exactly who they were thinking about and reminded them about the tasks, that they can choose the difficulty from 1 to 10. As a result, the participants should receive the most objective assessment possible. Of course, the head hopes that the guys will do everything possible. After all, even an average genius cannot complete a task of the 7th level of difficulty perfectly. The grumbling young man seemed to calm down when he heard that Professor Carlos would be there. But suddenly he was pulled up short. It turns out that the last person may find himself in a disadvantageous position. The director says that he gathered them all so that, in the end, they would choose the best project. Seraphim raises his hands and says that since he came last, he will choose from the remaining options. Hearing this, Dave decides to go first and draw a card. But the head is not very happy about this because Seraphim is the face of their program. Dave checks with everyone present to see if they are okay with him taking the card. The leader, seeing that the difficulty of his card is 9, decides to clarify whether the young man is sure that he wants to leave this option. But the young man stands his ground. And so, finally, all the students drew their cards, and it was Seraphim's turn. The main character pulled out a card with the 10th level of difficulty. The task is that the subject examines 500 glasses, appoints a spectator, and chooses one of the glasses. He then turns away and closes his eyes while the viewer changes the glasses randomly. Once the arrangement is changed, the subject must find the chosen glass of water, judging only by sight. Dave asks his opponent if he will stop at such a question. Seraphim reminds him that this is the essence of choice. The opponent sighs and promises that they will definitely watch Mr. Clive's performance. Dave is about to leave and finally states that he hopes that there are no fake players on the show. As soon as the young man left the room, the participants immediately labeled him as a rather ill-mannered person. Seraphim doesn't understand what's wrong with people and why they don't like his question. How should they even care? The director of the program reminds the young man that there are many students from the Imperial University among the participants, and it is not surprising that they do not like him. The protagonist is a little depressed and wonders why even scientists treat each other this way. Meanwhile, strange comments continued to flood the internet, writing nasty things and making guesses about the show and Seraphim. And so, on November 1st, the internal final of the Battle of Wits finally began. China standing in the spotlight, greeting all the participants. Opening the national finals, she said they were honored to welcome Professor Sid, who would be judging the contestants' performances. Sid is the youngest expert in the field of neuroresearch, and his works have received recognition from the scientific community not only in his homeland, but also throughout the world. The professor promises that science is the only criterion by which he will judge. The head of the channel, left alone with Seraphim, wanted to discuss preparations for choosing a viewer for the test, whether it would be necessary to do this in advance or the young man would handle it himself. The young man does not understand why this is necessary, and the director begins to explain to him that he needs a trusted person, since he is not seriously planning to carry out this task alone. Seeing Seraphim laughing and sighing a little, the leader couldn't believe that he actually wanted to do this alone. Mr. Clive says if they want to rig the competition, he'll just leave. Now, watching the live broadcast of the program, its director prayed that the young man would not let him down. Sid evaluates the performance of the first participant and says that it is worthy of 9 points, but considering the difficulty, he can only give 54 points. China says that this result is not enough to make it into the top 5, but the contestant still deserves praise for his amazing performance. She announces the next participant, and it is Dave, who has already participated in the Battle of Wits more than once. The presenter turns to Professor Sid, as many viewers have questions for him. The question is about facial recognition. Does it involve only the eyes? Sid replies that intelligence involves not only memory and computational ability, but also image processing skills and much more. Some people are able to recognize spatial distances faster than others. Other people can recognize the pitch of sounds faster, for example. The professor explains that these are all different types of mental abilities. As the competition progressed, Dave finally found the right face. Sid notes that given the complexity, the young man's performance can be called ideal. For such a short time, he can give him 10 points. China announces that if the points are multiplied, Dave's current highest score would be 95. The host announces the next contender, who turns out to be the winner of the qualifying round named Seraphim Clive, and she is surprised by the difficulty of his task. Sid replies that before he starts, he wants to express his surprise that someone chose this task, which he did not expect. This question was intended as a model for other tasks to establish the difficulty. China replies that first they need to choose a spectator who will help them complete the task. Finally, one of the spectators was chosen. He quickly went to the stage and stood next to Seraphim. At the second studio, others are watching the proceedings. A participant asks Dave why he suggested the viewer. Did he really want to put on a show with Seraphim in the lead role? The young man replies that he doesn't care about it. He just doesn't want anyone to rig the results. Backstage, he checked all the props to make sure they were okay, too. Dave suggests that even if this Seraphim has aces up his sleeve, the only way to see the difference in the glasses is to resort to cheating. Unless the spectator is a fake, only shame awaits him. One of the participants also suspects that it is impossible to complete this task without cheating, while Dave believes that it is unknown how this fool Seraphim got into Anna's university. The viewer looks closely at the glasses and realizes that they don't seem to have any markings. Finally, he selects 2 glasses and points them to Seraphim. After examining the glasses for a bit, China asks him if they can move on to the next part of the challenge. The young man is given a sleep mask so that he can't see anything. The presenter wants to know what the professor thinks about Seraphim's chances of success. Sid doesn't dare to assume the probability of success, but he believes that this test has reached the limit of human capabilities. But since he is asked to do so, he thinks that the young man's chance of guessing is close to 1%. China notes that she can't believe the professor has such a low opinion of Seraphim, but Sid reiterates that he adheres to the scientific criterion. Mr. Clive made his choice, and also pointing to the glass, raising his head, he was a little shocked by the presenter's gaze. The girl noted that less than 2 minutes had passed. She wanted to know if he was completely sure of his choice. Seraphim was adamant and had already definitely chosen a glass. And then the fanfares sounded, the spotlights flashed. His answer turned out to be correct. Dave jumped up from his seat at this sight. He didn't believe that this was possible. Another participant suggests that perhaps it was a special glass, such as the bottom being too thin or thick compared to others. But Dave understands that this can't be. He saw them with his own eyes. Even using the defocusing technique, it is impossible to distinguish them. China wants to ask what the secret of Seraphim's success is, but these words make the young man a little embarrassed. The host turns to Professor Sid, saying that a couple of minutes ago he had a low opinion of this contestant. But he completed the test perfectly, and now everyone wants to know if there is a scientific explanation for this. Clapping his hands, the judge suggests that Seraphim has an exceptional skill, four-dimensional vision. He explains that everyone knows that mammals are unable to distinguish between yellow and abstract colors. Using an example, he shows that in their eyes, tigers and plants are the same color. The eye of an ordinary person can recognize 3 colors. For example, they see crows exclusively as black. But birds, on the contrary, see crows as multicolored. Only those who have 4-color vision can see shades that are inaccessible to the normal human eye. Scientific research has long proven that water reflects ultraviolet rays. And if human vision can detect these rays, the water will have a certain color. China is delighted, which means that the talented Seraphim relies on special vision and can see what is hidden from the eyes of an ordinary person. Sid notes that this is not all. The water is constantly in motion. After the order of the glasses was changed, the surface of the water also underwent changes. To complete this test, you need not only exceptional vision, but also high skills and graphic thinking. Only in this way can you find the similarity of water patterns that have changed. Sid couldn't even imagine that this task could be completed perfectly. He reads that this is perhaps worthy of the title of winner of the tournament of the struggle of intellects. The professor believes that the young man can rightfully be called the king of intellect. At the same time, an overseas tournament of intellectual struggle was being held. And in the midst of the show, William was informed that information had appeared that a strong opponent had appeared in China. And it seems this genius got the highest score for microscopic identification of water. After conducting an analysis, their management came to the conclusion that this task could not be completed. William goes on a tirade about how these slant-eyed monkeys can't get over their inferiority complex and always make these false claims. And since they have decided to take such a step, William is afraid that Chinese representatives of the program will soon contact them. He suggests that this was all done to save his reputation. William decides that he needs to rip them off as much money as possible and win the tournament. The assistant is wary that competitors might reveal something secret about them and start stalking them. But William is not worried. But he's not worried, because even if they dare to dig deeper and even use money, it could be their own end. Moreover, if he loses to this amateur, the Chinese version of the program will cease to exist forever. William believes that this is the way the world is. Being weak is the worst sin, only the strongest can survive. As he was leaving the building, Seraphim didn't even have time to really understand what was happening before he was grabbed by the hand and dragged along. It was only after a couple more seconds that the young man realized that Miss Hazel was resolutely pulling him along. Suddenly she stops and, turning her flushed face to him, asks if he is free because she has one request for him. Seraphim does not yet understand what exactly she wants from him. Miss Grace blushes even more and admits that this is a personal matter and she needs his help. The young man laughs and asks her to tell him everything because they are not strangers. Hazel musters up her courage and admits that her parents insisted that she go on a blind date, and she wants Seraphim to pretend to be her boyfriend. This request shocked the hero. Mr. Clive tries to say delicately that he has a girlfriend, and why doesn't Hazel turn to someone else? She admits that she hasn't had any friends since childhood, and Seraphim is the only one with whom she communicates closely. Seeing that the young man does not want to participate in this adventure, she decides to resort to blackmail and declares that if he does not help her, he can forget about her. Seraphim asks her not to scare him anymore, and he still agrees to help her. The girl happily grabs his hands and continues to drag him along in an unknown direction. She decides to tell him that they are going shopping, because the young man didn't think that he would go on a date dressed like that. Seraphim objects and says that he thinks that everything is fine with these clothes. Hazel explains that his outfit is fine for everyday wear, but is not suitable for such a special occasion, so they need to buy him a formal suit. The young man was a little taken aback. The last time he wore a suit was when he was a child. He has no choice but to obey his fake girlfriend. And now he enters the restaurant dressed in a brand new suit. Seeing the decor of the establishment they came to, Seraphim understands that this is a nice place. Hazel admits that she doesn't know what her parents were thinking, but they introduced her to a 30-year-old man. She doesn't understand. Her relatives apparently think that she is not able to find a husband for herself, but that it should be a man who suits her and no less talented. They are finally met by a waitress who wants to know if they have reserved a table. Seraphim replies that they will send Terry here to meet with Lucius. Finally, the girl takes them to the right table, where a man is already waiting for them. Lucius gets up from the table to greet Hazel, but immediately notices that there is another companion next to her. The girl presses herself against her gentleman and also greets Mr. Terry, introducing Seraphim as her boyfriend. She admits that she came here only to talk. Lucius invites them to the table to talk calmly. Hazel, meanwhile, asks Seraphim to bring another table, which was not originally designed for 3 people. The young man sits down at the table and notices the man's distrustful look. He probably doesn't believe that the young people are close. Lucius admits that he has no idea what Seraphim does. The hero immediately replied that he is a student from Anna's university. The young man goes on the offensive, saying that he has a rich family and declaring that he is more handsome than Lucius, although they are certainly not comparable in age. Seraphim wants to know how old his competitor is this year. He assumes 40. Mr. Terry chuckles in response and notes that the young man is also quite eloquent. Nervously banging on the table, he wants to know what Seraphim's family does for a living. The hero doesn't understand why they are discussing his family here, or Lucius is so old that he still checks other people's accounts, or maybe he has some problems with his own. The man decides to ignore this and move on to what he heard, that Miss Grace doesn't have a man. Seraphim laughs. He calls Lucius a fool because the young man immediately said his reason for being here. He hugs Hazel tighter and declares that she is his woman, with whom he fell in love at first sight. Sooner or later, their parents will find out about this, so he advises Lucius to stop courting Miss Grace. This makes the man angry. He gets up from the table, shouting that he will deal with Seraphim, if not now, then later. As soon as Lucius disappeared from sight, the young man turned to Hazel and began to beg her forgiveness. He admits that the enemy managed to piss him off, to which the girl only laughs and replies that she understands everything. She thanks Seraphim again for helping her, and now she doesn't even know how to repay him. Maybe he could become her real boyfriend. The young man laughs in response and asks the girl not to be silly. Their awkward situation was resolved by a phone call. It turned out that the director of the TV station was calling Seraphim. He quickly said goodbye to Hazel and told her to leave as soon as possible. Seeing how quickly Seraphim left, Miss Grace felt such a feeling of sadness within herself. She was even afraid to ask herself if she liked the young man. Already in the TV station building, the head apologized to Mr. Clive for forcing him to come so urgently. On the contrary, Seraphim is grateful to his call because it helped him escape. He would be in trouble if Liana found out that Hazel was hitting on him. Entering the office, the young man noticed that all the participants had already gathered. Dave noted that Mr. Clive was again the last to arrive. Seraphim laughs and asks him to understand. He is a first-year student. He has so many classes that it is difficult to find free time. The other participants looked at him in surprise. They even managed to forget that he was only a first-year student. The head finally tells why he gathered them all here today. It turns out to break the news. They invited 2 academics to prepare them for the international tournament. Seraphim is surprised. He thought that this was just an entertainment show. Why bother with calling the academics? The director explains that 2 days ago, a couple of foreign participants contacted them and offered to play along in the tournament. Dave finds it strange that they weren't so confident last year, and now suddenly they're asking him to give in to them. But the leader corrects him. They did not offer to give in. On the contrary, they demanded money and promised that they would give them victory. The room immediately began to fill with disgruntled cries from the participants. They did not understand what was wrong with these foreigners. The head confesses that since they did not know what was going on against them, they decided to refuse their offer, but immediately after that they dissolved the international company. Now they claim that they tried to bribe them to fix the tournament results, and of course they allegedly refused them. Right now, the media is engaged in malicious speculation, spreading slander and calling them academic fraudsters. This is an extraordinary situation. Many countries have turned against them. One can say that the nature of the tournament has changed. They must win. Losing is unacceptable. At the same time, Seraphim received a new mission, called Science Without Borders. He needs to prove to the world that science is pure. Conspiracy and cheating are unacceptable. The head introduces the participants to those same academics from the Thai Academy of Sciences, who will now be responsible for their training. The first to speak is academician Josh, who says that they are all the pride of their country, and quite possibly the greatest representatives of the human race. But it is stipulated that even first-class athletes can improve their results with the help of professional coaches. This is a team competition, and the focus of abilities varies from competition to competition. Therefore, he must test their abilities in memory, calculation, observation, as well as experience and intuition, after which they will determine the order in which they will perform. It will depend on the strength of each participant. It will take them about a week to prepare, so he advises everyone to work hard and do everything possible to bring victory to their country. As soon as these speeches ceased, the participants decided that they were free and went home. The director didn't understand this. Wasn't it said that the preparation would last a week? Why did they all run away on the first day? Josh notes that there is no need to be here all the time, and also wants to say that he does not believe that they finally have an all-round genius. This time, they will definitely win. A week later, standing at the airport, Seraphim said goodbye to Liana. The girl was excited and wanted her boyfriend to give it his all, but her companion reassured her and promised that he would not lose. A warning sounded that boarding for his flight had already begun. Seraphim hurried to take his seat and finally told her to have confidence in him. He was the most powerful genius.